Welcome to Threads of Fate. I am your host, Kira Ryberg, and today we are here with a very special and exciting guest who has been on the podcast many of times. Chloe Margarita has come to join me for the 2026 year ahead astrology forecast, the first annual on Threads of Fate. And I just felt like it was too big a task to do alone. And who else could I have asked besides Threads of Fate fan favorite, Chloe? Chloe, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I want there to be an audience applause track or something because it's like
Agreed.
y'all, this is gonna be a juicy episode. I hope y'all are ready for all of 2026 in one episode somehow.
Yeah, somehow we're going to do it. We're going to try to keep it under 2 hours. We're going to do our best to get through everything. There's so much to get through. We have Saturn changing signs, we have Neptune changing signs, Uranus changing signs, Jupiter changing signs, the nodes changing signs. There's a lot of really, really big, important, monumental shifts that happen in 2026. And I think sometimes when astrologers say that, I can be like, okay, well, there's always planets changing signs, and that's so true. But the slower moving planets don't always change signs, right? Like Neptune takes about 14 years to get through a sign, Uranus takes about 8 years to get through a sign, the nodes take about a year and a half, Saturn about 2.5. And so having all of these shifts happen at the same time really feels like we are entering into a whole new reality, both personally and collectively. And I feel like it's going to be really fun to just break it down. How do you feel about all of these changes?
Well, right before this episode, I was thinking how would I sum up 2026 or what are the
Hmm.
big strokes? And as you're saying, it is like anything that can change is changing. Like the nodes are changing sides. Both Mars and Venus will be retrograde this year, which doesn't, happen every year. And in addition to all of these major shifts. So I think you're right. And we're ushering in a new reality, personally and collectively, right? So we're going to see it very much in our own lives, particularly, as these impact your natal chart, but we're going to see huge shifts politically and socially as well, which I
Yeah,
think,
I think so too.
yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Wait, do we Mars retrograde is 2027, right?
Oh, is it, or maybe it just
We
at the
get
end?
very close at the very
Okay,
end, I think, but it's part of the story at the end of the year too, is like Mars is doing that retrograde shadow through the end of
right,
2026. So
right,
we're
right.
building up to that. That Venus retrograde in Scorpio and Libra looks pretty intense. So we're going to talk about as much of it as we can. We're going to start with Saturn in Aries because why not? It happens at the beginning of the year, at the top of the year, right? Saturn moves into Aries on February 13th. And this is a big change of pace. We had a little bit of a taste test of this in 2025 because Saturn went into Aries from, I want to say, May 25th to September 1st. Got like a little bit of a taste test for what's coming, but Saturn and Aries is a much, much different energy than we've been experiencing for the past 7 years of Saturn, right? We did Saturn in Aquarius, Saturn in Capricorn, where Saturn had a ton of dignity, was really strong, really powerful. And we saw, you know, huge changes in the collective. We saw COVID, we saw isolation, we saw separation, right? We saw new foundations being built, other ones crumbling away. And then Saturn went into Pisces, where Saturn doesn't have a lot of dignity, has one bound at the very end of the sign that's 2 degrees, right? It's not super dignified and that decan in the first 10 degrees of Pisces. But other than that, Saturn has been peregrine for a while. And I don't know, there's this thing about Saturn and water signs, but it just feels
What
a
are you doing there?
little, what are you doing there? Like I feel like in a lot of ways, Saturn wants to create structure, and water is one of the hardest things to create structures around. So I feel like Saturn is well built for the task, but it also just feels like you're kind of slogging through it a little bit more. And Saturn in Aries is a big shift in dignity and temperament. How do you feel about Saturn in Aries, and how do you describe this transit to
Yeah.
clients?
Yeah. So my favorite description of Saturn and Aries comes from my friend Dira, who described it Saturn and Aries like when your parents catch you smoking and then they make you smoke the whole pack of cigarettes as punishment. So it's like that thing of right, this is Saturn in a Mars ruled sign. This is Saturn at his least comfortable, right? And fall, particularly, as we've mentioned before, is particularly painful because Saturn and Aries has the memory of being exalted, of being really good at Saturn things, and yet has has to do it in this very martial way where it's like there's going to be, I see it with Saturn and Aries people, like they learn a lesson really quickly or they hit a wall really quickly and then they have to wait. And so I feel like
Mhm.
this is going to be like a much more like jerky relationship to long-term things over the next few years, where it's like, something might happen really quickly and then there's going to be like double the time like dealing with the fallout or like actually integrating it. And so
Yeah.
I think frustrating is a word that comes up with this. And yeah, and I mean, it is inextricable from the co-presence with Neptune, which we just realized is happening the entire time Saturn is in
Yeah.
Aries.
Yeah, we don't get away from that. And I think, the thing about Saturn and Aries too is I kind of think about it as Saturn trying to do Saturn things in this very scrappy way. Like this isn't Saturn with all of his tools and resources and everything
Right.
like that, right? Like this is Saturn who is normally a very cold, dry planet that's now like you can imagine someone who's like built for the Arctic tundra is now in like the hot heat of the forest and they like can't take their puffer jacket off and their boots and all of this, right? It's like this uncomfortable environment. And so there's going to be, like you're saying, like these starts and stops. But I think there's also this thing of like feeling like you're just not built for it. And then at the same time, you have to do something there, right? Saturn wants to build foundations. And just because he's not his resource doesn't mean we get away from the story of creation that's really part and parcel, I think, to Aries, right? It's like it wants to trailblaze, it wants to innovate, especially that first decan, right? Is very much like a go-getter kind of thing. And it's to me is like I think I titled this transit when I wrote about it for my patrons like painful creations, right? It's like what do you want to make that you're willing to suffer for like long term,
Mhm.
because in Aries the passion ignites and then it fizzles out, and Saturn doesn't just leave when the passion leaves. Like you have to continue to commit and show up for it. So wherever Aries falls in someone's chart, really think about what you are building there, what you are crafting there, what you are creating there, and how you are going to continue to show up for that thing, even when you're not necessarily excited about it anymore. Like I find Saturn and Aries people tend to just quit really quickly when they get bored of something or they get over something. And I think this transit is kind of saying like, okay, yeah, maybe you are going to try some things like you were saying and kind of run into these starts and stops and have moments of pause and then get back at it. But I think ultimately, when Saturn gets through all of Aries over the next 2.5 years, it's going to look back and we're going to still feel like we made a lot of progress in that area of our lives and we built a solid foundation. And that comes from trying and trying and trying again, not necessarily saying, like, oh, it didn't work, so I'll just stop. And then, oh, it didn't work, so I'll just stop for 2.5 years without making any progress. Like, that's also not Saturn's MO, you know?
Right. And fallen planets, like their whole thing is they have to work with whatever. It's not the ideal conditions. And so a normally dignified Saturn would be like, well, this doesn't like stand the test of time. This isn't something I should commit to. But the image I'm getting for Saturn and Aries is like taking a road trip with like a really crappy car that could
Yeah.
break down at any moment. But you got to take the road trip. And like, I think the Saturn and Aries, like they want you to take the risk. Like there's
Hmm.
always no thing with Saturn and Aries of like, oh, I'm gonna make this thing that's already hard also maybe dangerous and risky. Like the
Yeah.
Mars needs some of that risk.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe we'll see more people doing like base jumping or
Well, I
just like
think
an edge to it. Yeah.
yeah, definitely with Neptune there too, right? Like Neptune creates like this ideal, this glamorization. And
Yes.
in Aries, it is like the glamorization of the warrior, of the risk taker, of someone who has the audacity, right? So it's like, oh, people doing like this dangerous thing. Like that looks really cool, And I think that
Totally.
Saturn and Neptune together are going to continue to do this. They've been hanging out with each other for a while, and there's kind of like this reality distortion thing that's happening. But I feel like the reality distortion in Aries is very different than it is in Pisces, right? In Pisces, we kind of already lack
Mhm.
boundaries. We're in a very intuitive space. We're very connected to our emotions. Now in Aries, it's like you've exited the sea and you're on dry land again. It's like there's a little bit more of, I don't know, like tangibility there. The cat that just jumped in front of the camera was amazing. Yeah, and so I think that there's just something really interesting about that, like what you're saying about like, oh, like I don't want to go base jumping. I feel like there's that Neptune influence that is really going to be pulling people to idealized risk taking. And I think
Definitely.
Saturn doesn't have a choice but to take a risk, which is normally not Saturn's. mode of operating, right? Saturn is more risk management than risk taking. And I think we're going to
Right.
see this like weird relationship with that when we have Saturn and Neptune in the same sign for all of Saturn's transit through, through Aries, because Saturn moves in on February 13th, but Neptune moves in on January 26th. So Neptune heralds this kind of groundbreaking thing of like, let's go into Aries and create a new world there, right? And it's almost interesting, like Neptune kind of ignites the dream first, and then Saturn catches up. And I think when you have that way of going about the events, it's almost like there's something that is sparked by Neptune, like the imaginal fantasy, dreamy kind of part of Neptune, right? It's like, oh, I could be so great here. Like I could do this. I could build this thing. It's going to be amazing. And then Saturn comes in and is like, oh, it's also going to be really hard, actually, too. And it kind of squashes the dream like a little bit. But it also gives us the tenacity to show up and build the dream.
Right, right. And I mean, with Neptune on its own is just going to keep you in this like Delulu land and, like cloud of fog. And, Saturn has to be like, okay, well, let's put up a wall here. Let's hang some things. Let's like create something. And yeah, I think it's really going to test, like, especially I'm thinking in America, like our relationship to like the rugged individualism and military industrial complex. Like, I can't help but think of like, our current Secretary of Defense, Secretary of War, as they now call him, Pete Hegseth, who's like, he like has these delusions where like, that are clearly based on these very like, racist, sexist policies that
Yeah.
only white men should serve in the military. And it's like, sorry, the actual Saturnian reality is like to fight a war, you need to include everyone. And this like idealized version is just about you and your own insecurities. Right. And so
Yeah.
it's like, really like what is your relationship to yourself and your power, and like what are your delusions around that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think on an individual level, it can be empowering, but on a collective level, I'm certainly a little worried, to say the least, about Neptune's glamorization of war. And like, this is the god of war sign,
Right.
so all of a sudden there's going to be kind of that thing towards individualism. Like, Aries is a sign that is concerned with the self. And I think on an individual level, sometimes that can be really helpful, right? Like, this is you know what, I'm going to go after my dream. Like, everybody else be damned. And I think sometimes that's needed and that's necessary, and that can be a helpful energy to make progress in the Aries part of your chart, right? But I think when we're taking that away from the individual and expanding that to the collective, and it's like everybody doing that,
Yeah.
everybody pursuing their fantasy of individualism and like going after their passion and like trying to build something and feeling like the world's against them, right? Because that's a little bit of the Aries energy, is like it's me versus the world. That doesn't tend to create a super harmonious environment. And Aries quite literally opposes Libra, which is the sign of harmony and unity and peace. And so I think on some level, while it might be inspiring and empowering for individuals, that collectively it is a little bit worrisome. I don't know if we need more individualism right now as a society.
Yeah, the phrase that comes to mind is like personal optimization. And like I've
Yeah.
been following like trends around like bodies and like, right, obviously like thin is back, but it was never gone away. But this cultural commentator said that it's not just thin now, it's sculpt. So you see like women
Yes.
like Lauren Sanchez who are not just thin, but they have all these tiny muscles.
Muscles. Yeah.
And through that only happened through like doing Pilates like twice a day and surgery, right? Like getting their ribs removed and liposuction in specific areas. So now you see these celebrities who are so thin, but now have these like tiny toned muscles. And it's like
Hmm.
that is like body as cyborg. That is like so outside of like how nature creates us. But like that's
Yeah.
I feel like Saturn, Neptune, and Aries is like, yeah, how can we turn ourselves into machines?
Yeah. Did you see how people are like breaking their legs so they grow back taller? It's
Yes.
like the pain for the ideal feels very Neptune in Aries. And even when Neptune was in Aries for a little bit earlier this year, I started noticing that there was like this blending of like the fashion world and athletics, right? Like
Yes.
all of a sudden, like professional sports teams started being sponsors for like high fashion luxury brands, and like they started having those people be more the faces of the brands. And I think we will see a little bit more of a tendency to go in that direction. But outside of the maybe more big scale
Yeah.
collective stuff. How would you talk about this to someone who's like, okay, so I'm going to have all this energy in a certain area of my life and my chart. What does that mean for me on a practical level?
Right. Yeah. I think so. It's whenever I see people who are like have Saturn and Neptune stuff, it's like you kind of have to be able to like switch consciousnesses a lot. And like conjunction is going to make that more difficult, but it's like there's going to be times where you're going to have to be Delulu, like in a good
Hmm.
way, and kind of lean into like who can I be like beyond like my borders. And then other times you're going to have to be like, no, like that's not me. Right. This is my lane. This is what I'm focusing on. And even though it's fun to like dream about all of the possibilities, like there has to be something I'm sacrificing and some ground that I'm laying. And so at times you have to be like really like practical in structures, and other times you have to like float off in the ether, which, yeah, and sometimes maybe both somehow.
Yeah. I think it's important to mention too that, Saturn in Aries is kind of one of those interesting ones where normally we'd say Saturn is harder for night charts, but Mars is harder for day charts. Now we have Saturn in a Mars ruled sign. So you can kind of anticipate that the Aries part of your chart, while it is trying to build something and create a solid foundation and it has this new dream about what it wants to be, it's still probably not going to feel like a super easy transit all in, right? Like it's going to demand, like you were saying, some sacrifice. It's going to demand some toil. And a lot of times it's probably just going to show up and feel hard, right? Sometimes it's not like,
Yeah.
I don't like that
Yeah.
Saturn thing of like, well, if you just put the work in, Saturn will be good to you and you'll get the rewards. And I think that's a very day chart perspective to have. And I say this as a day chart, but I see a lot of people with night charts where it's like, actually, no, Saturn is just kind of beating my ass in whatever area of life for 2.5 years. And there's not a
Yeah.
lesson, there's not work to put in there that I could make this better, And the optimist in me always wants to say, like, yeah, like, try to work with the energy, but also just kind of prepare for the fact that, like, the Aries part of your life is about to be going under construction. And that construction might feel like you're taking a hammer or an axe to that part of your life, especially in the beginning, in a way that does feel a little bit challenging and a little bit destructive and probably really disorienting because Neptune is there. I think with Saturn Neptune stuff, it can also create, like you were saying, that need to switch consciousness, but also sometimes feeling like you're trying to build a really solid foundation in a certain area of life, but the fog keeps rolling in. And you're like, okay, well, where does this go next, though? Because I can't actually see where my hands are when I'm laying down this
Exactly.
piece of brick. And I think that is part of what we're getting this year. And it will get easier as Saturn gets further away from Neptune, right? And won't be so into that fog. But their conjunction on February 20th, right? Like it happens pretty shortly after Saturn enters Aries on February 13th. That's going to
Yeah.
create almost like this explosion of that energy. And I think part
Yeah.
of it is also making peace with the fact that you're probably not going to have the answers that you're looking for right away. And especially in the first part of 2026, when it comes to really what's happening in Aries. Like if you're confused, good, you should be kind of thing. You know what
Right.
I mean?
And I think this transit will test the perfectionists among us because Neptune is going to make us hazy on the terrain. Saturn
Hmm.
already rules ignorance. Saturn in Aries is going to make us charge towards something that might not actually be for us. So you might have to build something and be like, oh, actually, this isn't working. I'm going to have to, tear this down and try again. And
Yeah.
don't, and I think the wrong thing to do is to see, oh, that I'm uniquely bad at this, or this is a problem versus like, this is the terrain. This is
Yeah.
how you build. And Saturn and Aries is like starts and stops and having to try again, go back to the drawing board sometimes.
Yeah. You're working your way through a foggy desert. It's like you're trying to build a pyramid in the foggy desert. It's going to take some
Yeah.
time. You're probably going to fuck it up a
Yeah.
couple times. Like, that's
And
okay.
it's like in Saturn's the elder, so I'm imagining like this like old man like being like taken to task by this warrior who's like, get back to work, get back,
Yeah,
and then tone
yeah,
down,
yeah,
try.
absolutely. Right. Like it's ruled by Mars, which is also important to mention that we get a lot of different flavors of this transit every 6 weeks when Mars moves through a new sign, So there's going to also be different qualities to this transit. There's going to be times where it's easier. There's going to be times where it's more challenging. There's going to be times where it really feels like we have no clue what we're doing when Mars is averse to Saturn and we can't see things even more so. So it's one of those where you kind of just have to strap in for the ride. And I think that's a big theme of 2026 is like strap in. Things are changing and some for the better and some maybe not so much. And that's life, right? Like we don't always just get to change and improve all of the time. Sometimes it's going to look like deconstructing something to build something stronger. And I think that's oftentimes how Saturn transits feel. It's like you
Right.
kind of have to take everything apart so you can make sure it's really sturdy or have something come in and, you know, um, test what's sturdy so you know what to
Yeah.
rebuild or where to put your efforts because Saturn is also going to it's toil, it's labor. It's not the relax planet. It's the all right,
Exactly.
grind, and it's almost like what you were saying about the old guy trying to build the pyramid in the foggy desert is like in Aries, I think a lot of times we want to go at it alone. There is that tendency to be like, I don't want help from anybody else. It's my way or the highway, right? That's kind of the God of War's perspective. But Saturn does have triplicity dignity in Aries, cooperating triplicity dignity, but we will take any shred of dignity that we can
Yeah,
get
I
throughout
count it.
this transit,
Mhm.
right? And triplicity dignity is like the I get by with a little help from my friends kind of essential dignity, right? So don't be afraid to ask for help building your dream. And I think that's one of the ways that we can fight back against the kind of individualism that might take over during this time is like remember that we get further together, that by offering a helping hand or by asking for one we can actually make a lot more progress. And then also it stops being solely your dream when you let other people in on it, right? It's like, okay, also you brought an interesting perspective to the table and oh, I'm seeing it differently now and I wouldn't have had that if I didn't ask for help. So I think that's also something to remember when times do get tough. And it's such a thing with planets who don't have dignity, but they have triplicity. Like if they're in detriment or fall, and this happens quite
Mhm.
often, it's like you just got to ask for help. And the trick is that you really don't want to. And guess what? You get further when you do. So take that advice or don't, but that's part of the Saturn and Aries transit.
And it makes me think too, just looking at like past Saturn Neptune conjunctions, how much like like collective relationship is so important, like for better or
Hmm.
for worse. Like we see like mass like cultural shifts, like the internet, first became a thing in the last Saturn Neptune conjunction, and then TV was popularized, like these group events, right? As well as like the fall of the Berlin Wall, or like, but then you also see like the negative side of like people to coming together and doing like groupthink, like McCarthyism or like the satanic
Hmm.
panic. And so I think it's very much like, yeah, how does like the collective like help empower and shape the individual, then how does that also like degrade like our thinking, right? How does the group support, but then how does it also like support delusion?
Ooh, that's a bar. Yeah, that's a great point. That's a really
So
good
like
point.
you just see this so much with like the history. I mean, polio was, the polio vaccine was discovered when, Saturn Neptune happened in Libra. Also note
Yeah.
that it's been happening in cardinal signs over the past,
Mm,
few times.
yeah.
Um, and but then it's also like, yeah, the when I mean, it also just brings to mind, just I feel like media and the internet and a lot of conversations we have about like how things, I mean, AI at this point and the deep fakes and how they can make these accurate videos. I feel like this is going to be a lot of, can we even trust our own eyes and
Yeah.
what we
Oh,
see and what other
100%.
people, if did this person actually say that, or did someone just put something in an LLM generator or whatever?
Yeah, absolutely. And in a way that is actually causing real pain in people's lives and real problems, right? This isn't just like, oh, this is a funny little, like TikTok thing. It's like, oh, this is going to actually harm someone because this is Aries. It's a
Mhm.
little bit more aggressive in nature. It's a little bit more capable of creating harm because that is a malefic responsibility. I don't know if that's not the right word, but it's a malefic signification. So part of it is knowing that like yeah you got to use your discernment, and that's a property of the sun in a lot of ways, and this is the sun's exaltation, right? So using discernment is going to be key, right? Keep reading, everybody. Check,
Right.
fact check, like trust, find sources you trust and then also question them, myself included, like question the things that I'm saying, question the things that you're hearing from other people, right? Like don't be afraid to develop your own opinions and then also
Exactly.
make sure you're not getting too deep down your own echo chamber, right? It's that constant thing of like checking yourself, checking reality, checking what feels sturdy and solid, because you never know when that Neptunian influence is coming in to distort your perception. And that's going to
Yeah.
be super key to having, people around you that you trust, that you can check in with and be like, Am I high on my own supply right now, or do you feel this way too? What's going on in the collective? Is my perspective, in line with other people's? Is it opposed to other people's, right? And really just starting to understand where you fall and all of that. But I think discernment is so necessary during this transit. And luckily, Aries can give discernment because of the sun's influence here.
Totally. And yeah, I think with that too, it's like realizing that, a lot of these like, big tech leaders and media moguls, like they want to extract from us, not just like money, but like data and like our very likeness, right? As well as like
Mm-hmm.
our attention and our discernment, like you're saying. Like I saw this like video that RuPaul made, and it's like, you know what? Pick up a book. You know what doesn't have advertisements in it? A book. Let's all read a book this year.
The slogan for 2026. Let's all read a book this year.
Yeah, and I feel like that's like thinking of just like, influencer culture. Like I feel like that's going to be the thing. It's not like your wealth. It's not going to be like how good your life looks. It's going to be like, do you have a brain and a sense of individuality? And yeah, can you read and write?
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, we might see some kind of attacks on literacy, on the availability of that kind of stuff. Like we do get this pretty, no other way to dice it, brutal Mercury, Mars, Saturn conjunction at 7 degrees of Aries on April 19th. And this is a double malefic influence in a malefic sign with Mercury. And something that we talk about a fair bit on the podcast is like Mercury is not only benefic. Mercury is also has a malefic face or is both and neither nor, and Mercury will take on the characteristics of whoever they're around. They are a chameleon. So if you put Mercury with Mars and Saturn, all of a sudden Mercury is like, oh cool, we're doing bad shit. Like let's go. And Mercury's very on board with that kind of perspective. And, like I have this quote, I think it's Balance might be Firmicus. And it's like Saturn, Mars, and Mercury cause crime, treachery, judgments, and alarms. Men go into debts and expenses for the sake of scriptures or mystic lore, and they suffer no ordinary tribulations and ruin. And it goes on and on and on, but it's not good stuff, and I think interpersonally, that's a tough transit to have because Mercury Mars stuff almost always weaponizes our speech, right? Like this is the fighting words transit. And then you add Saturn into the mix, and this just feels very inflammatory, but also like it could be impacting the ways that we're communicating on a larger scale. Because, like, yes, it's Mars, Mercury, Saturn, but don't forget Neptune's there too. So there is this more collective global influence. It's a doozy, that one.
God, I forgot Neptune was there, and we just talked about
Yeah.
her. Now I'm like, oh right, she's there too.
That's the Neptune influence. That's Neptune literally doing his thing.
Literally, yeah, exactly. Wait, can we pause for a sec? I just have to use the bathroom.
Yeah, of course. All right, we're back. But yes, I feel like this Mercury, Mars, Neptune, Aries, Saturn, all of it
Yeah.
is kind
Why
of
not?
just it's kind of just intense. I'm going to bring up the chart just to show you guys what that looks like in the sky because a couple days before we get this conjunction, we get the Mars Neptune conjunction. And one of my kind of phrases
Mm.
for this is either moving through the fog or spiritual warfare, which don't love that one, but I do feel like it's very Mars Neptune in a lot of ways, especially when it's taking place in Aries. So it's almost like there is confusion about how to proceed. And then we speed up a couple of days and we get to around April 19th, April 20th, and we get this Mercury, Mars, Saturn conjunction all in Aries. And it's an intensification, right? It's a little bit more likely to inflame this part of our chart. I would expect, this to probably be one of the toughest parts of the Saturn and Aries transit during this time. And this is probably when you're really going to get, this is stress test stuff. This is going to feel like you're going to want to, you're be pulling your hair out a little bit, which is really interesting because we've got some really nice, gorgeous benefic stuff happening in like other
Right.
areas of life, right? Like we have this Moon Venus conjunction in Taurus and Jupiter in Cancer, and then there's some stuff that's going really well, and then on the other side of it, there's some stuff that just looks, frankly, like some nasty work on the part of the cosmos. But how do you feel about this
Yeah.
alignment?
Well, probably more than I do. It's like trying to elect a wedding for this spring was very interesting because you see this moon Venus and you're like, oh, in Taurus? Like, yes. And then you're like, oh, fallen
Yeah.
Saturn
Hmm.
on Mars. And like, and it is that thing because like they can't see each other. It is like, especially where cardinal signs or where Aries is involved. Yeah, it's a lot of like What's coming to mind is like you have to maybe like embrace being the baddie sometimes, whether that's like the baddie in other people's stories, like with the Mercury of it all. Like I can definitely see
Totally.
things like slander or like, conflict with friends or,
Hmm.
people who thought had your back, especially with the Neptune, like, oh, I thought we were friends, but we
Yeah.
weren't. But
Yeah.
also like Mercury, like, right, is the business bitch. Like I see a lot happening with like commerce or like, maybe get rich quick schemes or even more, realizations of like corruption and like how
Yeah.
money is in the government or whatever. And so definitely like mind your relationships and your words during this time, but also, yeah, your
Totally.
business transactions.
Yeah, that's really smart. I feel like it's one of those things where you could get, caught in a scam or something like that. And I think there's definitely, a need to look at where this is happening in your chart because it's going to manifest very differently if this is in the first house, which in that case, I would be a little bit more cautious around what you're doing health wise and maybe like not the time to go bungee jumping sort of energy, right?
Right.
And then if it's happening in your fourth house, like this could be maybe like a explosive argument that ends up causing you to want to move out, or something like of that nature, right? In the seventh house, this could cause discord with, a partner, whether that's romantic or a business partner or a client or something like that. In the 10th house, this could be, to me, this is like, I want to quit my job. Like there's no other,
Yes.
or I'm quitting my job, in the 10th house, right? Which is not to say every Cancer rising is going to quit their job at this time, but probably experiencing some type of discord or disharmony or disagreement with an authority figure or just extreme discontentment with the way things are going professionally for you because no matter
Yeah.
how we dice it, it's both malefic. So it doesn't matter if you're a day chart or a night chart, you're going to be feeling this one. And I think that this is a really good time to kind of, again, use that property of discernment that we were talking about. Really watch your words because this is pretty, say something first and think about it later kind of energy. And you might say something you end up regretting or something that gets you into trouble. This is kind of like the popping off sort of thing. I wonder if we'll get, some good rap music around this time. Like this is, it gives that. But
Yeah.
interpersonally, it doesn't feel like the soft, cozy one, even if there is some other really beautiful stuff happening. And I think that's the thing to remember during this time too, is like, yes,
Yeah.
this looks kind of hard, or really hard, but there's also some really beautiful things happening in other areas of life. And astrology is never blanket good or bad, as I always like to say, right? And we've got two benefics and two malefics, and the other two benefics are very happy. Jupiter's going to be exalted in Cancer, Venus is going to be at home in Taurus, and Mars is also really dignified at this time. It's just that we're doing the malefic conjunction. And we just came off of that Mars Saturn square. I don't know anyone around me who didn't feel that. This is a renewal of their relationship together, but in a sign where Mars has the sway, and I think that's going to feel qualitatively really different than what we saw with the Mars Saturn square in those final decans of Sagittarius and Pisces, where it felt a little bit more like, something coming to an end or a screeching halt. This looks like fighting for a new beginning, but that comes through,
Mm.
divisive communication and different things of that nature. That's that first decan of Aries. It's like we're blood, sweat, and tears. We're toiling away to make something.
Yeah. And I think it's Nina Griffin who described the malefics as they cause change and they bring things to an end, which is
Yeah.
painful for us as humans. And so I think that beginning will require, right, discerning what needs to go, what is not for me. And that's the thing is like if something, can stand that Saturnian test of time, like sure, there might be shakeups, but you don't have to worry about it suddenly going away. But I would just
Hmm.
be mindful during this time of like being honest of, okay, it's painful to maybe leave this living situation or this job or this relationship or right even maybe just something smaller in your life, but if it doesn't actually align, if it's like hurting more than it's securing, then the best thing is to just kind of surrender to whatever, like to surrender to the unknown rather than cling to like, oh well, I know this structure, because that Saturn Mars is
Yeah.
like dynamite.
Yeah, it's explosive, and I think especially with Aries being the exaltation of the sun, like a big part of this sign is about following what is authentic to you. And this might be the harsh realization that, oh, this job, this person, this friend, this belief system, this hobby, is not for me anymore. And it feels misaligned, and that might cause a rift or a rupture. But sometimes that's necessary, right? Like sometimes we need the fire, we need the inflammation to like cauterize the wound, you know what I mean? And to be able to move forward. And so yeah, this is going to be one of the tenser ones, and I would just kind of recommend everyone to take it easy. Maybe we don't schedule a vacation for April, end of April. Like that's a good time to just try not to add anything more stressful to your plate. There will be stressors that pop up all on their own without you initiating more. And yeah, my God, please don't get married on April 19th.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, the Venus
To
moon
anybody who has their
got you in
wedding
a
date
knot.
already, I'm so sorry, but please don't do this. Yeah. Okay. And then just to finish out kind of, the rest of Saturn's journey in Aries next year, we're going to get Saturn stationing retrograde at 14 degrees on July 26th. I don't really think we need to see the imagery for that one. So I'll just take off the chart for the people that are watching the video version. But I think what's so fascinating about this station is that it happens the day that the nodes switch signs. I feel like you're like
Whoa.
bouncing to say something. I'm like, go, go.
No, no, I didn't know that. I'm just taking it all in. It's like this year, it's just like, in some ways, like, I'm not worried about the change. It's just like, it's going to be a lot of change,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
And it's changes that herald other changes. It's like Saturn stationing at 14 the day the nodes change signs, like that is not an accident. You know what I mean? It's like all of a sudden we start backtracking through Aries when the North Node moves into a Saturn ruled sign, right? Like those two things happening are significant. And, whenever Saturn stations retrograde, it's a really important marking point in the greater story of that transit. And it's happening right at the middle of the sign, right? So there's something that we're kind of bookending here where it's like, oh, I thought I was just going to keep going fast through Aries, and actually no, I need to turn around. I need to change my approach. And at the same exact time, we see this bigger shift where we're starting to pour a lot more energy, time, resources into a Saturn ruled sign. There's something just so interesting about that. I'm curious, like, how do you suss that out? Like, how do you think that's
yeah.
going to play out for folks?
Well, just thinking about it mechanically, right? So it's what was really marked by this, right? Saturn, Mercury, Mars conjunction in the first decan. It just feels very much like doesn't matter how, but you just need to break new ground and try something new and go towards the unknown with
Mm-hmm.
shamelessness. And then right by the time it stations, it'll be in the second decan, which is like we've kind of established our kingdom, we know who we are, we're kind of creating our influence. And
Mm-hmm.
then this retrograde is making us be like, oh no, we have to build like break more ground, and maybe we have to like stop refining and get back to like the bare bones basics. And so it's a lot of like, especially yes, just Saturn in this like very solar sign. It's very much like your relationship to yourself, and that's how you build on top of that is
Yeah.
going to go through a reckoning right around end of July when Saturn
Mm-hmm.
stations retrograde. And I'll say too, like you were talking about the triplicity dignity of Saturn and Aries and like calling on your friends, and the station is happening on a fixed star Alpheratz, which is the head of Andromeda. And
Okay.
so on the one hand, right, Andromeda is this chained maiden who's rescued by this man, and so there's a lot of like romantic vibes to it, but it's the head, and so it's her point of like imagination and freedom and independence. And so this to me is very much the star of like having it all, of like being
Mm-hmm.
yourself and having your relationships not be in conflict with that. And so I think it's also going to be like, oh, like I'm building this kingdom, who gets to be in this kingdom, and how do I how do I merge with these people while still maintaining the things that I need to do? Because that's what Saturn Aries is like. Okay, help the people, like get help from the people, but not at the expense of your vision and your
Yeah.
values that you won't
Yes.
compromise.
Totally, totally. And I think there's something too about that second decan of Aries being so concerned with consistent action, right? And then Saturn's like, wait, like I've been doing this consistent action thing, but I'm realizing now I maybe need to go back to the beginning and start over. And that looks like me not taking consistent action. And that can feel at odds or kind of difficult for us because we are making progress and now we're not. And in our society, that's usually looked down upon, and we can feel a lot of shame around that. And so I love that you brought in this fixed star focus where it's like, yeah, and also there is this other supportive influence that can come through your relationships. And it's just about realizing that, maybe you don't have to struggle so much, and maybe you're
Yeah.
changing your course of action is actually not self-sacrificing. Maybe that's actually
Yeah.
self-supportive, and supportive for other people too, So if you haven't
Mhm.
listened to the Aries 1 and Aries 2 decan episodes that Chloe and I did, I would highly recommend that you check those out because they're going to just be so important to the story of this year with Neptune moving through the first decan, us getting that conjunction of Mercury, Mars, and Saturn, and Neptune too, really, in the first decan, and then Saturn stationing in the second. It's like that's a massive, massive part of the year. And
Totally.
just to really bring it home, what I found wild beyond the nodes thing is also that when Saturn stations direct on December 10th, stations at the exact same
Crazy.
degree that we had the Mercury Mars Saturn conjunction on. So it's like we are literally going back and revisiting the huge disruptive, turmoil, frustrating circumstances that arose on April 19th, April 20th. And it really feels like there's something about Saturn coming back to that degree without Mars there that's like diluting some of the inflammation. And it's almost like that's why Saturn has to go back because something got ruptured there and he needs to go back and repair it a little bit, spend some extra time on that degree. Like I keep thinking about like there's like a hole in the pyramid and like Saturn
Right.
kept climbing and kept building and then was like,
Yeah.
wait, but I have to go back and fix that because if I don't go back and fix that, I'm not going to be able to move forward anymore. I'm not going to be able to keep building. And maybe actually what's the most supportive for me and what I'm creating in the Aries part of my chart is to step back and go revisit this thing that was really painful and difficult so that I can move forward and so that I can build a sturdier and stronger foundation. But yeah, that harmony between the two of them was just really, I thought, cosmically elegant.
Yeah, yeah, and it's just funny that it's like, yeah, the first year we truly get like Saturn, like not dignified. Saturn's like, well, you also get a node ruled by me, so you have to
Yeah.
deal with me. Yeah, and it's like, and it making me think too. It's like I feel like Saturn and Aries, it's like good is better, or done is better than perfect, and so there is gonna
Hmm.
have to be that thing of like, well, this works for now, and then that retrograde very much feels like, okay, and now I have to like go back and like actually make it sturdy.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, is there anything else that you want to say about Saturn or Neptune in Aries, or do you think we're ready to
Hmm.
move along?
I think just one thing is like, right, like Aries, especially the second decan, is so much about like, right, being at the center of things, being
Hmm.
accepted, right, being, a leader. And Saturn is the exile. And so I feel like a lot of this year will also be like, oh, like, do I want this thing because I want to be accepted by the group? Or am I going to have to detach from like that group think and be willing to maybe be a bad guy in this person's story or be misunderstood. But it's like,
Yeah.
I feel like Saturn and Aries is going to challenge you to really hone in on what is my individual values and desires outside of like what like the straight world, what the, conventional society tells me to want, which is part and parcel with like we're entering a recession. Like the American dream is clearly a lie and
Yeah.
is being pulled apart. So now what?
Yeah, exactly. And like figuring out what now what for you, right? And whatever area of your life this is going to be occurring in. And yeah, I feel like, you just got to not be afraid to piss some people off. Like that's the thing is like finding your like I felt this so heavy when Saturn moved into Aries was like almost like people being like, no, I'm just going to say it. I'm just going to do what I need to do. I'm going to follow my path. I'm going to follow my voice. I'm prioritizing authenticity over sameness, and I think that that is a good thing in a lot of ways, but it's also probably going to piss some people off because not everyone's going to like you, and depending on what part of your chart this is happening in, it's like it's going to activate some of that instinctual desire to belong and make
Yeah.
you realize that sometimes you're going to have to rebel against that to be able to step into a more authentic form of self-expression. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the Saturn and the
Embrace.
Aries transit, baby. And we'll do, month by month stuff too. So whenever there's a big Saturn thing happening in the sky, we're obviously going to talk about it in the monthly forecast. But, that's the big one. Let's talk about
Yeah.
Jupiter. I'm really
Love
excited to like after all that malefic
it.
energy,
I
let's move
know.
into something benefic and juicy because We get Jupiter in Cancer, but we also get Jupiter moving into Leo. I think, we've been doing Jupiter in Cancer for a while, right? Jupiter's very happy to be in Cancer, is exalted in Cancer. And also, the thing that I like to remind people about this transit is that it changes every single day. And so, the expectations that we place on
So
Jupiter
smart.
and Cancer to bring us solely positive circumstances is entirely dependent on what the moon is doing. And for anyone who pays attention to astrology long enough, you're probably going to realize the moon is actually not always in good shape and maybe even rarely in good shape. There's signs that the moon doesn't feel comfortable in. There's aspects to malefics happening constantly in the sky. And all of that is going to determine how good and supported she feels to help Jupiter do exalted Jupiter things. And so just managing our expectations around this transit, I think, is super, super key because it's constantly shifting. And also, it's going to be a little bit better for day charts. Like, I'm so sorry, night charts. If you're feeling like it's not giving, there's a reason for that. And that's because we need Venus to come along and help give Jupiter a little bit of extra boost for the night charts, which we will see because we get another benefic conjunction in Cancer. But before that happens, on March 10th, Jupiter is going to station direct at 15 degrees of Cancer, conjunct the fixed star Sirius. So, fixed star queen, take us to church. Tell us about it.
Yes, of course. Well, I was recently reading about Jupiter and Cancer. Sue and Sundry released a series, and Kaylin
Hmm.
had a great write-up where she talks about like what Jupiter and Cancer is really good is like in that very lunar way, that slow and steady movement towards growth, like knowing that things will change and circumstances are not always in our control, but like there's this like, yeah, like very like kind of like elephantine, like I'm going to slowly move towards it, like every bit, day by day.
Hmm.
And yeah, so it's like we've had to be much more like trusting and like embodied and like, short term with our like long term goals in a way. And
Hmm.
Sirius is, it's a Jupiter Mars star. It's the brightest star in the sky. In some ways, it's the hardest star to talk about because it's just so big.
So big.
But like I love, in our discussions of it, like you really pinpoint like Sirius is so much about like what is your ultimate spiritual purpose? Like what not like what will sustain your body, like what are you here to do and like change
Hmm.
in the world and represent like beyond like your small self. And so I really feel like the stationing direct on it will be a moment of like a renewal of clarity of like, oh, this is what I've been building at like since like Jupiter, became exalted and oh, I can maybe get a better sense of where it's headed and
Yeah,
like where I want to be like over the next 6 months.
I love that. Yeah, I think especially because
Yeah.
to me, Sirius feels so big, like you're describing, and very ambitious, very, can really instill this almost like larger than life. I need to make something of myself. I need to do something really big. And I think that with an exalted Jupiter at the exaltation degree is
Right.
like finding ways to also tap into that and start making that a reality, right? And it's not always going to be about material gain. Like, I think Sirius is not super concerned with that. It's more a byproduct of what kind of the greater goals that Sirius bestows upon an individual is like that really ambitious spirit tends to oftentimes create some type of material abundance, but it's not part of Sirius is
Yeah.
kind of how I think about it, right? And so to me, this feels like, okay, that clarity that you're talking about, right? Of like around whatever it is in Cancer and that part of your chart, it gets a big boost and a lot of support. I think of Jupiter as being like a very supportive, very nourishing, especially in Cancer kind of influence where it's like, how can I help? And it's like, how can I help these big dreams that you have, these big goals that you have, this ambitious nature of yours, so you can feel more resourced, you can feel more connected, you can feel more supported, you can feel more in tune with your body and your greater purpose in the world. Right. And I think that there's something just so beautiful about that. It's just so juicy, like a Jupiter series, and Jupiter's going to be there for so long because it
Mhm.
stations at like the very start or the very end of the degree and then it like moves on, so it's at 15 degrees I think for like a month. So we get a long time of this, which I think is going to be really nice, and especially for anyone who has cardinal placements in the mid degrees, right? Like we get that Saturn station later on at 14, but we before that get the Jupiter station in Cancer at 15. So you guys are going to be getting some really nice stuff from Jupiter, and then, a fair few bit of challenges, but it helps balance out a little bit. It's not just all Saturnian difficulty. There's also some Jupiter bounty that's waiting. And I think in a lot of ways, Jupiter finishing up a transit in the sign is like Jupiter trying to like soothe everything over. It's like when first Jupiter first got into Cancer, I felt like it was just trying to clean up all the shit that Mars had wrecked when Mars was retrograde in Cancer. So Jupiter had a lot of management to do, like a lot of restoration and healing to do. And it feels like once we get to that station degree and start moving forward, it's not really about the repair from Mars in Cancer anymore. It's about setting you up so you're good in that area of life. So you've elevated to a new baseline of support and nourishment in the Cancer part of your chart, right? For the next 12 years until Jupiter's back in Cancer again.
Yeah, and Jupiter, is a of the nature of tempering, of like bringing
Hmm.
things like into harmony, and so it's like growth, but in that like sustainable way. And especially
Yes.
with the moon, it's like, yeah, like are you like taking care of your body on that like very intimate level? Like how are your emotions doing? Like knowing that like those little attendings and like how you do things and build day by day is how you get to the long-term vision, and like very much like enjoying the journey and like having that be part of it instead of like, oh, well, this is where I want to go, so I'm going to rush right there. It's like, no, the quality of how you get there is so important. So, yeah, exactly. Like this retrograde is, as opposed to Saturn retrograde, is like, oh, crap, I have to do this again. It's like, oh, what? How can I like further strengthen this? Like, where are the
Hmm.
holes? How can they like, how can I, lovingly attend to them so that way, imagining like a boat metaphor. It's like, and now when I go off to sea, it's like I can trust and let my guard down and trust that I'll go like where I need to go.
I love that. Yeah, that's beautiful. So we get that Jupiter station on March 10th. And then the kind of last thing, that big Jupiter thing that happens, is on June 9th. And we get a Venus Jupiter conjunction at 25 degrees of Cancer, which interestingly enough is the same degree that Jupiter stationed retrograde at, which I think is so, again, just like, like the cosmos are so elegant and beautiful and like perfect in the way that they do these things, right? Where it's like, okay, there was this realization that, like you were saying, we need to go up and maybe like patch some holes and you reinforce the boat so that we can withstand longer periods out at sea, and it's like that immediate awareness was maybe a bit of like a ooh moment in the Cancer part of our chart. And then Venus and Jupiter come back in on June 9th to be like, here you go. Here's a nice little blessing. I think for most astrologers, we look forward to the benefic conjunction every
Oh,
year, right? It's like you get Venus and Jupiter, you get the two planets that are most associated with happiness and joy and optimism and relationships and creativity and beauty and abundance and all of the good stuff in life coming together. And not all benefic conjunctions are created equal, right? Sometimes they occur in signs where like neither of those planets are super happy to be in, like in Virgo or something like that, right? But in Cancer, they're both pretty happy to be here. Venus has triplicity dignity in Cancer. This is going to happen in that final decan where Jupiter is not only exalted, but also in his own bound and in his own decan. It's a very nourishing, abundant part of the zodiac. I think as we're recording this, the next episode that's about to drop, Four Threads of Fate, is the third decan of Cancer episode. So, if you guys want to know more about that, check out that episode. But obviously, this is happening on the fixed star Procyon. So there's some stuff that I want you to talk about there. But in general, how do you feel about benefic conjunctions, and like how do you
yeah.
experience those? How do you talk about them with other people?
So, yeah, well, first, my first thought looking at this was like, huh, I should throw a party on this day. Like, it just seems like so
Party
fun, of
girl.
course. And I'm like, let's look at the moon. But like, what I'm thinking too is like, right, the Jupiter as a benefic, right, is so much more about like the long term, like global, like collective happiness. And Venus is like, oh, like happiness between one and the other, right? Two people coming together. And so this feels, it's like you've gathered like all of this like, you know, wealth and, psychic material and sort of fortification. And now you're actually able to like receive and give that like to like the people in your life,
I
and
love that.
how like not just feel it in the like optimism of like, oh, everything's going to work out, but like everything's going to work out and I also feel amazing and hot and like connected. And
Yeah.
yeah, and it's like, especially in the last decade, which is so much about like abundance, it's like, what are you going to do with all these resources? How are you going to
Hmm.
like continue to share the love and like help fortify it so, you and your loved ones like are all supported?
Yeah, there's a spirit of generosity, I think, that can really show up, especially with a benefic conjunction here. Like you said, it's like having more than enough and more to share. It's like I feel so good that I want to give you some good stuff and I want you to feel good and everyone's just kind of feeling good. I will
Yeah.
say in terms of like specificity, the day before the actual benefic conjunction when the moon is in Pisces on June 8th is probably going to feel a lot better than the actual benefic conjunction the next day when the moon is in Aries conjoining Saturn.
Good
But
to know.
all in, it's a pretty nice conjunction. And I'm curious, like, how do you see the fixed star Procyon's influence on
Yeah.
this conjunction?
Yeah. So like Sirius, Procyon is a dog star. And the second you mentioned Procyon, I heard my dog bark upstairs. So literally dogs. Dogs will be a thing. But if Sirius is like, this like, dark, mysterious psychopomp, like, attendant to Hecate, dark goddess, mother vibes, like Procyon is a dog. Procyon is a dog who's having fun and rolling around in the mud and doing doggy stuff. And like the way I describe Procyon is, first of all, like it's much more about like ships and like short-term games. And so there's
Hmm.
going to be, as opposed to Sirius, like building something big, like Procyon in the stationing direct is going to be much more like, oh, I'm just going to follow this one passion, right? Especially with Venus there. And then when that, stops losing interest, I'm going to go to the next one. But the way I describe Sirius is like, I mean, Procyon is like, he kind of wants you to be like a baddie, like the way that dogs are kind of naughty, which is
Yeah.
why I think this would be good for a party, is just like, being a little tricky or like trying something new, or, not like embracing, kind of in like a similar kind of Saturn and Aries way of just like, like, you don't have to be a goody two shoes all the time, or,
Hmm.
to be what other people want you to be. Do what like, if you like, do what like, yeah, satisfies your cravings and like
Hmm.
makes you feel alive, even if you like have to break some rules. Procyon will protect you if you like really like, oh, like I can't like, smoke cigarettes here, but I really want to. And Procyon's like, go off, queen.
I love that. I also think that, Procyon is so much connections with magic and witchcraft, and this is also
Definitely.
Hecate's decan, and so a great
Yeah, if you haven't
time.
gotten into magic during Jupiter and Cancer, like do it.
Great time to get into some occult shit, some magic or something like
Definitely.
that. I feel like they're going to be kind of inclining us towards that in a really beautiful way. But yeah, this is also when the night charts are going to get some of that really beautiful Jupiter and Cancer juice, because all of a sudden the planet that is most capable of bringing you support and bringing you resources is now able to contribute to that in a major way. So I would think about June 8th, June 9th, wherever Cancer falls in your chart, kind of that's where you can expect to have some of the biggest blessings that are going to come through for you this year, and this is always taking within the context of your own chart, of course, but the Cancer stuff is where we get a lot of the sweetness, a lot of the juice and a lot of the beauty this year. And that really happens in that first week of June when Venus gets closer and closer and closer to Jupiter. And that's kind of the big Jupiter and Cancer stuff. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about before we move into Jupiter and Leo?
I mean, no, because I was literally like, yeah, and if Jupiter and Cancer is in a weird house for you, or it's not, your favorite place, you'll just get Jupiter and Leo in the middle
Yeah.
of the year, which as a Leo rising, I'm not excited for.
Yeah. So a couple days later, after, well, maybe a couple weeks later, right, we get Jupiter moving into Leo on June 30th, right here, right? And, this is going to happen right around the time that the nodes are changing signs. The nodes change signs, I believe, on July 26th. So about a month apart, they kind of hang out at that last little degree of Virgo and Pisces for a while. But that means that for the majority of the Jupiter and Leo transit, we're also going to have the South Node there. So it's a little bit more complicated. It's a little bit weirder than Jupiter in Cancer, right? Because Jupiter in Leo has triplicity dignity, has a decan, has a bound. Like in general, Jupiter is pretty good in Leo, but then there's something that comes in and warps that
Yes.
natural state of beneficence. And I have thought about this so much, so much. And I'm
Yeah.
just curious, how have you been thinking about this? How have you been talking about this with clients?
Yeah.
Like what's your
Yeah.
Jupiter and Leo, South Node in Leo pitch?
Right. Well, I think of, the classic like South Node, bad for material, like good for spiritual. So like
Hmm.
this is like if you want to be the King Midas, like on your like, pile of gold, like if and there's no like deeper meaning or spirit behind it, then you're probably not going to like this transit. Like this isn't going to be the like lush king Jupiter and Leo transit. This is going to be the like um deeply realized spiritual master who like is able to like understand maybe like the structure of their life and how to conduct themselves. Like it makes me think of like, most of the teachers at like this monastery that I stayed at, if they're not Pisces, they're Leos, right? So there is like this
Mm,
very strong like, the sun is this place of like wisdom and, God and all knowing, which is the ruler of Leo and the ruler of Jupiter while he's there. So I think it's going to be like, yeah, how do you like how does your identity change like by being open to like deeper spiritual truths or like committing to like other value systems. And I think at the South, it's with the South Node, it's going to be much more about like, what are you going to sacrifice for what you believe in?
ooh.
Um, Versus like, what can I get from doing the right thing?
Yeah, yeah, I love that. It makes me think of just kind of like the story of the Buddha as well, right? It's like coming from a place of kingship
Exactly.
and like wealth and all of that, and then leaving it behind to go seek deeper spiritual meaning and almost like the renunciation of that rather than the acquisition of it. And the way that I've been thinking about it is like they don't they don't negate each other. They work
Mm.
together, right? Like I'm thinking about Jupiter and Jupiter's natural state of kind of bringing support to whatever part of the chart that Jupiter is moving through, especially for day charts, right? And in that, we find opportunity a lot of the time, right? We are granted opportunities to up level to, like you were saying, kind of expand our baseline, to have new experiences for wisdom, for abundance, for growth, for friendship, whatever it might be, depending on where it is in your chart come through. And I think with the South Node, it's not that those things don't happen, it's just that you're kind of exhausted. And it doesn't feel as good. Like the way that I've been describing this transit to clients is
Please.
it's like I'm really obsessed with this, and maybe it's not that good, but like I think it's pretty good. Um, is it's like, your friend invites you to the concert that is like your favorite band, right? And you're
Yes.
so excited to go, but you have to work all day and your boss is a dick and you didn't sleep the night before and you're just feeling so and tired and you're still going to go. You're still going to go to that concert. It's your
Yeah.
favorite band. But while you're there, like kind of the whole time, even though you can enjoy it, you're thinking about how and tired you are and how you kind of want to go home and just be in bed. And it's like the opportunity that you're afforded is not as easily enjoyed because there's something else that is kind of sucking you dry, right? And I think about that a lot with the South Node is like it creates an absence or a lack or a haunting or something that just kind of takes it out of you. And Jupiter, on the other hand, tends to feel very opposite of that, right? Jupiter brings in stuff. Jupiter brings in the abundance and the support. And so it's like you're getting some of that abundance and support, and you're also getting something that sucks you dry. And it's like, oh my God, like say this is happening in the 10th house, right? It's like, oh, this career opportunity that I've wanted for so long. And guess what? Like, I don't really feel like doing it. Like, I'm not that excited about it, actually. It doesn't feel as good as I thought it was going to feel. And
Yeah.
there's kind of
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
about it that just makes it feel like a little bit like we're not going to appreciate it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Or like, I think what we as humans are most comfortable doing is that very like North Node thing of, I want this, I'm going to go get it.
Yeah.
And the South Node, wherever the South Node is very much like the spirit will get it for you. Like if you stop trying to grasp at it. And so, right, thinking of like the South, if it's like happening in your 10th, it's like, yeah, like you can be given like, or maybe you'll like have a huge realization about your career or something will be given to you. But then it's like, you still have to do it.
Hmm.
And right. And I think it's about like, okay, well, the thing that will actually replenish that 10th house stuff the most is doing the fourth house stuff, right?
Yeah.
Do you like where you live? is there peace there? Like, have you, built up what you need to then resource? So I think it's like, whenever we're talking about the nodes, it's like, if this way doesn't work, just do the opposite. And
Yeah.
you'll find that, the more it's like, yeah, very Chinese finger trap. It's like, I don't know. Like the
Yeah.
more you go that way, the more the other thing will work itself out. But I think it's like wherever the South Node is like you can't fully understand it. You can't be in control of it. You just have to like, yeah, like give it some space to do its own thing, I guess.
Yeah, I kind of imagine it as almost like this void opening up and like everything starts
Hmm.
just like slipping into the void. And at first, you almost don't really notice it. Like, I think the South Node transits usually
Yeah.
take a little bit longer because it's not something
Yes.
coming into being, it's something kind of slipping away. And sometimes that happens
Totally.
very quietly. And it's like all of a sudden it's like, wait, there's a hole in the room and there's no furniture here where there used to be. Oh, there was a couch over, like, it's like that kind of feeling of stuff just like sinking into a pit. And then Jupiter is filling it with meaning and, like you were saying, this like spiritual quality and a
Yeah.
philosophy and
Hmm.
other opportunities, right? But that also comes with letting something go and
Yeah.
releasing our attachment to something as well. And if, like, to continue using the example of the 10th house, it might be like, yeah, here's like an amazing career opportunity, but you also have to let go of something else that you had been holding on to or were excited about or have been working towards for years to make space for this new thing that's coming in because you can't
Yeah.
hold it all. You can't do
Yeah.
it all, and I think that's going to be hard to reckon with because I think our notion of Jupiter and Leo is not that, right? It's just like, ah, yeah, like I'm going to get it and I'm going to be the king in my castle and it's all going to come to me, right? Because Jupiter really likes to be in Leo. One of my favorite things that this ancient astrologer Porphyry says is that when you don't have an exaltation lord of a sign, the other triplicity lord comes in and acts as a quote unquote co-lord, like in the way exaltation lords do. And for anyone who doesn't speak astrology, what that means is that in addition to the sun ruling Leo, Jupiter also kind of rules Leo, right? So Jupiter does super good here. And
Yeah.
so, in that way, I think similarly to Jupiter in Cancer, there's almost like this inherent expectation that it's just going to give, like it is going to serve as a
Right.
transit. And I think the South Node coming in is like checking that a little bit and being like, actually,
Hmm.
to give, like, or to get, you're also going to have to give and you're going to have to let go and you're going to have to be ready to really change your approach to that area of life wherever it falls in your chart.
And especially in Leo, I mean, it's going to be about like the self and your relationship to the self you've constructed. And like makes me think of, right, the end point of Buddhism or the point of practicing is nirvana,
Yeah.
which, right, means literally the snuffing out of the candle. It means you are not a person anymore. You have left the cycle of incarnation and you have joined everything.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, like, there's this, complicated thing in my practice where, like, as a Leo rising, I was like, wait, so I have to give up myself that I love so much to practice?
Yeah.
But it's not that. It's like they say to study the Buddha way is to study the self. Like, the more actually you can let go of your ego and, like, I have to be this version of me or I can't be
Mm-hmm.
this, the more you become yourself because you're
I love
not
that.
attached to a certain outcome. So I think this is like, right, in that like South Node jujitsu way, it's like the more you can let go of like old versions of you or old stories about you, the more authentic you can actually become.
Oh, I love that, especially the part about letting go of old stories about yourself, right? I think this is going to be a radical realization of who you
Yeah.
truly are, and it's going to feel super fucking uncomfortable because of the South Node. It's like,
Yeah.
whoa, I didn't realize that about myself, and now I have to do something with this information because my understanding of who I truly am and what's authentic to me and what path I need to go down in the Leo part of my chart looks very different now, and it's going to demand some reckoning. And we get
Yeah.
some interesting, transits like through this time. One that I just have have to talk about
Yeah.
is the Jupiter Cazimi, which happens at 6 degrees of Leo on July 29th. So this is right after the nodes have shifted signs. Like we said, that happens on the 26th, 27th, depending on time zones. And so we get this Jupiter Cazimi at 6 degrees, and it's also a full moon in Aquarius that is not quite an eclipse
Right.
yet, but we're moving into eclipse season. The moon is conjunct Pluto. It is, and like to just top it all off, we also have a Mars Venus square that's like going exact at the same time, and Saturn's just stationed retrograde and is still at the stationing degree. This is what? wild to me. And I want to know what you think about this full moon, because I feel like this is going to be a massive one in the story of Jupiter and Leo as a whole.
Right. Like it feels like what's coming to mind is like you like something big is going like imagine like a giant worm underneath the earth and you just feeling like the rumblings of it now of like something's happening that's coming, but I don't quite know like what it is or the change hasn't happened.
Hmm.
And but like with that Jupiter, it's like that it's going to be this tension with like right this moon, going deep into the earth and excavating with Pluto of like what is right. I think you said like what is being uncovered, and then that Jupiter Sun, like these two planets of like wisdom and deep insight, like are going to like have this great perspective, but then it's like, oh, but I don't really have control over what's coming up and what I do to respond to that, to or how that
Yes.
materially manifests. Or thinking of the sun being very much about like the ideals and like thoughts, and then moon is like what
Hmm.
actually happens.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's like bridging. Like, I think there's going to be a lot of like having to bridge a lot of cognitive dissonance between like maybe your what vision or what you see what's happening, and then materially what you have to attend to, you
Yeah.
know?
Totally. Yeah. And I think, the thing about Cazimis is that it's like a planet entering the heart of the sun. So their properties are illuminated for a moment. It's
Yeah.
usually like a moment
Yeah.
of startling clarity, right? Where it's like, oh, like that's what this is about, actually, And what's interesting about this is that that's also kind of a full moon thing, is like we're bringing things to a
Mhm.
maximum degree of visibility. And so we're doing
Yeah.
all of that at the same time. But instead of this feeling like, oh, illumination, I know where I'm going now, it feels like Pluto's influence makes it a little bit more like we're exposing something
Yes.
rather than like something's being revealed and brought to light rather than this being just like this internal moment of clarity. It's like there's something a little insidious about this with Pluto here that feels like it is it is the moment that sets the stage for the eclipse season to well and truly begin, which we're going
Yes.
to get into here in a little bit. And it's almost like I feel like at this point we're in the eclipse. Like it's the pre-eclipse party, but we're basically doing eclipse stuff, right? It's like this full moon in the same sign after the nodes change signs during this Jupiter Cazimi. And I think that in a lot of ways it's going to bring clarity to the Leo part of your chart and to the Aquarius part of your chart, but
Yeah.
probably through realizing like the really deep work that's needed
Yes.
to change in those areas of life. Because ultimately, the nodes are going to force change, right? This is why we kept saying like 2026 is the year of change, right? Because it's Neptune and it's Uranus and all these planets changing signs, but the nodes also really create usually like disruptive qualities wherever they are. And that doesn't always mean it's a bad thing. I think of them as almost like agents of fate pulling us towards, the things that we're meant to experience for better and for worse. Fate can be cruel and fate can be kind, right? And this feels like tied into that. It's like we're getting a little bit of an understanding of what is going to completely morph and shapeshift over the course of the next 18 months with the nodes and these signs. It kind of kicks off with a greater awareness, but I think it's going to feel like unsettling. Like I used to track the moon's transits. Like I used to write these moon horoscopes where I looked at every single aspect the moon was going to make every single week, and I would write these like super long, detailed forecasts. And every time the moon would conjoin Pluto, it would create that kind of like pit in your stomach feeling. Like when
Mm.
you are having to wake up really early to go to the airport. And like you don't get to like have your normal bodily rhythms, and you're just kind of like waiting for the other shoe to drop because you have to like get to the airport and are you going to make your flight and no one's awake yet and it just kind of feels weird. Like to me that is what moon Pluto feels like, and having that happen at the same time as this like Jupiter Kazimi thing that we would normally consider to be quite positive, right, is like there's something lurking underneath the surface and it's getting brought to
Right.
light, but it doesn't
Right.
necessarily feel comfortable.
Yeah, it feels like a karmic report card of like this is you're gonna see on this day. Like this is what you've like if you've right done your homework, right? You'll
Yeah,
you'll see that. But if there's still work to be done, which I mean we all have, then you'll
yeah,
see that as well. But like
totally.
the right you will get a, a intimate look at the work you've done and how you will reap what you have sown or begin to see, and then as the eclipse comes is then you doing that work, but this is you being like,
Hmm.
oh, this is the check-in.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And something that the astrologer Joe O'Neill pointed out to me was that this Jupiter Cazimi is happening at the same degree that Mars stationed retrograde at in Leo during this last Mars retrograde cycle. So
Perfect.
there's also going to be kind of pings and resonances and echoes from that time frame and that retrograde that are now being brought to light once again. And that was a really sensitive degree. You know, we also had Mercury stationing really close to there, I think, sometime this year as well. And so we're just going to kind of keep pinging also some storylines that occurred then. So I would consider, you know, what was coming up for you and what was at the end of 2024 now. It's like, how are we where
Yes,
we
I think it was
are?
like November 3rd or something.
Yeah, I'm looking for the exact date. Here we go. Like we get, yeah, it's December. Oh, maybe it's December 6th. Oh, I was very close off of memory. Yeah, December 6th, December 7th. Of 2024. So right around that same degree, we're getting all of this stuff getting activated again. So that's going to be a really big and intense full moon to kind of keep in mind as we move through,
Mm-hmm.
the Jupiter and Leo
Mm-hmm.
transit. That's going to happen on July 29th, right? So just about a month after Jupiter enters Leo. And then, we get a little bit of a sweet spot when Jupiter's going to be in his own decan from August 15th to October 9th. Yeah, it's a nice decan. It's a sweet one. I love Leo too. And I know you do too, as a Leo too, rising. Hair flip.
Cute. She's cute. It's fun being the chosen ones. Yeah.
I mean, Leo too often is a little bit the chosen one. So I would say that that can be a time where, especially when Jupiter does feel a little bit more comfortable in Leo by having that decanic dignity, that it's going to feel like you're getting a little bit more of the good stuff of that Jupiter and Leo transit during that time. Because as Jupiter moves forth into the final decan of Leo, which he will station at the very end of the year on December 13th, going to station at 27 degrees of Leo, Mars is like also right there with Jupiter at this time. So we get this, and so is the South Node. We get this Jupiter, Mars, South Node conjunction all at the same time in Leo, which is just really interesting.
Yeah.
I think of that as like Mars is creating this like inflammatory thing, but there's also something that's like sucking Mars's vital force and energy out, and Jupiter is
Yeah.
trying to infuse meaning, but Jupiter is also kind of worse for wear. Like as a combo, I feel like Jupiter, Mars, South Node is like spiritual movement, like Tai Chi or yoga or something like that, right? And so almost that kind of laid back forms of movement that have an underlying faith, religion, philosophy, meaning underpinning them, but applied in like a grander scale that is not a metaphor to Leo part of your chart. How do you feel about that, Mars?
Yeah. I mean, I think about Jupiter and Mars a lot just because they're so entwined in my chart. And like a way that
Hmm.
really works for me is I am like I only do the Mars stuff if it like fully like sits with my principles and it doesn't feel like Jupiter is like the oath maker and Mars is the oath breaker. So
Yes.
I only like cut things off or end things when I feel like there can't be any repair. And
Mm.
so, especially with the South Node there, it's like you cannot act in that Mars, like, classic selfish. Well, this is annoying me, so I'm just going to cut this out, or I don't like
Yeah.
this. Right? It's
Yeah.
like this is a time of like acting not because you want to, but because it's like I feel compelled to, or spirit. It's like I have to, and it's like I'm tired and I don't want to, but it's like I
Yeah.
just have to cut this off, or I have to like assert this,
Yeah.
as it aligns like with my principles. And especially in the third decan of Leo, it's like you're in a position of like right defending yourself of like you've built
Hmm.
something and maybe like someone's coming at you and you have to like set a boundary or you have to like you know rework something, because it's like, not in alignment. And so it very much feels like, yeah, like how can you like do the Mars thing in a way that is like beneficial for as many people and yourself as possible and also
Yeah.
God.
And also, yeah, no,
Yeah,
100%. I think that this is probably going to be on November 15th, November 16th, where we really see the part of the story that we were talking about with Jupiter in the South Node of like having to let something go to create space for new
totally.
opportunity. It's like
Yeah.
Mars comes in and almost gives us that push we need to really sever something,
Mhm.
right? And it might be, like obviously it's going to happen in different parts of the chart for everybody, right? But this might be like, if we're going to continue using the example of the 10th house, like the moment where you have to quit the job to go start a business or something like that, because that's really where your heart lies and that feels like the authentic path for you. And so you might have to sever it to be able to accept, the potential growth and abundance that Jupiter is going to bring. But this is the moment of kind of feeling like, oh shit, I have to let go. It's uncomfortable and I'm scared a little bit. Like I don't know how this is going to play out. Like I think that there is probably a principle of doubt present because we also have like the sun squaring both Mars and Jupiter from 23 degrees of Scorpio. So there's some internal conflict with like our ideal and the way that we're envisioning things and kind of the goal that we have in that very solar way that is coming into conflict with the thing that we're letting go of in the Leo part of our chart. And I feel like there's this kind of thing happening where it's like we're kind of testing, like, okay, are you really going to let it go? Are you really going to pursue the other
Yeah.
thing, especially when you don't know it's going to pay off yet? So really think about what area of your life that this is going to be impacting and consider how, in mid-November of next year, there's going to be a real call for you to release, to let go. And then Jupiter's going to backtrack after stationing, retrograde at 27 Leo
Mhm.
through a fair bit of this sign. And I think only once Jupiter is really direct and moving forward are we going to start to see some of those things that we have been chasing start to really bear fruit. But I don't think that comes in 2026, to be quite honest with you.
I think, yeah, I mean, it seems like, right, it's interesting how so many of the changes happening like are woven together and seem to
Hmm.
build, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like we're completely clearing ground and like making space for like a more aligned life. But yeah, I mean, even thinking of, there's also like a nice sextile here between, with Venus and
Venus.
Libra, who's
Yeah.
just finished her retrograde cycle. So it's like we're
Hmm.
also just coming off, which we'll get into later, like a whole reworking of like our relationship to relationships and love and like the things we like. And so I feel
Yeah.
like, tapping into just like our basic like taste and values and things that like we're drawn to versus things we're kind of disgusted by on a more like visceral bodily level is also going to be like a helpful clue of like, does this feel right to me? Not just like intellectually, but like in my body.
I love that. Yeah, it does feel very connected. Like we've just gone through this total reanalysis of all of our
Yeah.
desires and yearnings and what brings us that source of joy and pleasure. And then all of a sudden now it's like, okay, and time to let something go. And those two
Yes.
things are hard to divorce from one another. But I want to talk a little bit about just the nodes changing signs in general, because this
Yes.
is a big shift, right? We've been doing, South Node in Virgo and North Node in Pisces for a while, and now we're going to get North Node in Aquarius and South Node in Leo, which feels very different. And, I know that we both kind of talked about some of the things that happened in the world, like the last few times that we've had this
Yeah.
transit. But I think in general, just so people know how to kind of orient themselves around this change in their own charts, right? One of the
Yeah.
easiest ways to think about it is you're going to start pouring a lot more time and energy and resources into the Aquarius part of your chart.
Yeah.
Fate is going to start pulling you there. There's going to be
Yeah.
in that Rahuvian way, like an insatiable hunger to go do the Aquarius stuff, right? So if that's like the seventh
Totally.
house for you, all of a sudden, like this desire for relationships, to be in partnership, to be connected on a one-on-one basis with other people is going to increase, right? And on the other side of that, we see the South Node in Leo, which is where we tend to start sacrificing certain things, right?
Yeah.
The absence, the void that we were talking about is because we are giving so much on the other side that something has to kind of also be let go of so we can grab on to the other part of our lives, right? So we're
Exactly.
reaching for Aquarius, and at that same time, we're letting go of some of the things that are happening in Leo. And as I'm saying this right now, I'm starting to realize how this is going to play out in my own life, and I'm laughing. Um,
Can't wait to dish later.
well, Aquarius is my ninth house, and like so much of what I've been talking about doing is like less
Wow.
short form stuff and more long form stuff, right? Like I'm like, I
Totally.
gotta stop doing all these like lectures and guidebooks. I need to start writing like longer books and doing longer courses and like all of this, right? It's just like a
Mhm.
very baseline thing of like the North Node in the ninth house, kind of activating this desire to do things that are a little bit more long term, long form, long standing, right? That is one of the significations of the ninth. And then at that time, same time, like to be able to do that is like you don't have endless capacity. You have to let go of doing some of the regular short form stuff, right? So you can apply this to anything.
Yeah.
Like if all of a sudden a relationship comes in the seventh house and you want to grab onto that, then you might have to prioritize yourself a little bit less because all of a sudden there's a new person in your life that you want to give more to, right? And always balancing that, like don't go too far in one direction. I find that happens a lot with the in the first and the seventh in
God.
particular, right? It's like don't totally self-sacrifice for another individual, but it can be a marker of having to pay a little bit less attention to you because you're paying a little bit more attention to the we or to the other person, right? And so that's kind of how I think about the nodes moving into a new axis. Is that kind of how you think about it too?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think you even mentioned it, but yeah, I like Austin saying it's like you're taking like both hands off, or one hand off the south node topics to put both hands on like the north node topics. And
That's
I
so
think
good.
too, it's like just like we kind of had now with like North Node and Pisces, I feel like more spirituality, more magic in the mainstream, but also more delusion. And then
Yeah.
Virgo, it's like, yeah, like I don't know, like
Logic,
logic, yeah, like
facts,
basic facts.
data.
But also, yeah, maybe like a, at least in my own life, like a letting go of like the perfectionist tendencies or like, having it all like exactly like lined up and
Yeah.
serviceable. It's like much more of like trusting. And, I, even for being like a Leo rising, which I love, like I'm kind of looking forward to like having more of like the Aquarius in my life because first of all, I love Aquariuses, obviously.
Thanks.
And like a big thing I've been thinking about with this is like the tendency of that, in that very solar way of like being drawn towards the warmth, right? Being drawn
Mm,
towards like wanting to please people or, doing what I think, will gain the approval and something that I find so vital about, Aquarius people, especially that being my seventh house, is like, oh, like if you set boundaries, based on not like people, wanting to draw people in, but just like, oh, like this doesn't work for me. Or like I'm willing to
yeah.
like not go to the party because like I need to take care of myself, which you don't really see Aquarius is like a self-oriented sign, but it is like, it's willing to do their own thing
Hmm.
or create, structures that are maybe not warm, like for the sake of that, Saturnian long-term
Yeah.
relating or
Yeah.
sustainable relating, where we're still individuals and then we come together on our own terms. Whereas I definitely, with the Leo rising, can be like, oh, well, this feels so nice and fun and shiny. So let me just like continue to be myself and, for you. So like, I don't know, to keep that going. And then I'm like burnt out because that's just not sustainable. And so I think it's going to challenge like, oh, are you going to do this just because like it feels good right now or because you're getting approval? Or does this
Hmm.
actually fit into the skeleton of your life?
Yeah, yeah, I love, oh, skeleton of your life feels so good for Aquarius, and I think on a wider level, in general, Saturn ruled signs are a little bit, I think you mentioned earlier, like Saturn's the exile, right? So there's going to be an increase of a tendency to maybe separate or distance, right? And
Yeah.
a little bit of like, I'm wondering if and we've kind of been seeing it with Pluto and Aquarius, like the
Yeah.
fall of celebrity culture, like I think I wrote in the notes, I was like, is this like the rise of the weirdos and the fall of the celebrities, right? Like we kind
Yes.
of get like a different orientation towards appreciating what is different instead of sameness,
Yeah.
and I think it's an interesting thing in Leo, right? Because it is about the individual and it is about being unique and it is about being authentic. But we also see the ideal form. Like I'm thinking about, someone like Kim Kardashian, not even doesn't even have Leo placements to my knowledge, but like now everyone in LA kind of like looks like Kim Kardashian, right? And it's like there's this
Right.
sameness, and that feels very Leo. I think
Definitely.
Kris Jenner has like a Jupiter Pluto
On
conjunction in
Regulus.
Leo and Regulus, yeah. And so there's like that, and like she birthed this family, right? That has like
Right.
created
And
a
a face,
new
right?
standard and a
Everyone
face.
wants her face.
Yes. And, I think we're going to start appreciating a little bit more what makes us different, what makes us unique, what makes us stand out,
Yeah.
in a way that isn't about conforming or approval, as you
Right.
mentioned, right? It's not about adhering to the status quo, it's about challenging it. And I think that's kind of
Yeah.
exciting. Like I think of Aquarius as being, like it's people say like it's Uranus's domicile, right? Like it's the rebel. And I think it's more about Saturn being like, okay, we set all of the structures and the traditions and all of that in place in Capricorn, and now we're going to consider what needs to be changed. Like air is much more movable than earth, right? To create an even more idealized form of that. And that can manifest sometimes as like rebelling against the status quo to be able to create new
Yeah.
changes. And I think we're going to see more of that, which is, in my opinion, it's exciting, right? Like the last time we had it, like
Oh,
Amy Winehouse won like Grammy of the Year, Lady Gaga rose to prominence, right? Like these people that were not necessarily considered like the it girls or were kind of considered to be weirdos, right? Like everyone was like, what is like, who is Lady Gaga? Like, what is she doing? And all of a sudden she gets this big rise, and even the most like famous, maybe like it girl of the time, still Beyonce, right, released like I Am Sasha Fierce, which is so fascinating for South Node and Leo. Like she literally abandoned selfhood and was like, I'm actually like this alter ego, which just feels so North Node in Aquarius and South Node in Leo, right? Is like letting go of the idea of who you are or the figurehead of who you are to move towards a place of like experimentation and being on the outside and learning to develop an acceptance around that a little bit.
yeah, and I think what'll be interesting is, like you said, Aquarius is very much about doing things differently, being willing to like abandon structures or maybe versions of yourself that, don't work for you. But it's also set an egalitarian side, right? It's not being different to be like, oh, then look at me. It's like I'm going to do things differently because I want to like benefit the whole. And that's something else I love about like Aquarius is too, is like they're, the sun is exiled in Aquarius because they're like I am more concerned with the collective or the group
Yeah.
rather than like who I am and my particular story. And you mentioned it's like that was also the last time the nodes were in this axis was when Barack Obama was elected. And like
Yeah.
he created a dream, but one that was based on like, oh, here's someone who at least in theory, was going to like help the collective, and he was
Yeah.
here for the every person. And we mentioned it's like who's going to be like the next, you know, figure, big political figure. And Zoran Mondani is coming forward and like has
Yeah.
brought like everyone like beyond New York is like I would vote for him. Like I'm supporting him because it's like because
Totally.
he in that Aquarius way is like always, always hits like this, certain people, like, oh, what am I trying to say? Always hits like the same points of like, I want to help the people and I'm
So
working
consistent.
for, yeah, each and every person and never wavering from that. And of course, he
Hmm.
has Saturn and the moon in Aquarius. So he
Yeah.
like is very much representing that. But he's also, and it's funny that he is a Leo rising. So it's like he's
Yeah.
getting in the first and seventh.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see like what happens with his journey as mayor, going forward. But yeah, I think that's a great point. And even, like yeah, we had Obama get elected. We also had like the rise of Apple with like the iPhone 3G, which is really interesting because now we think of Apple as kind of like the ubiquitous technology, right? But at the time, this was like the first time Apple even became a major competitor. Like they were kind of challenging the status quo of like what the phone world was at that time, right? And I think what we might see during this transit in a more collective level is the rise of new things happening that end up becoming very popular. But at the time, it's going to feel like, oh, whoa, this is a new thing that we're not used to. And this is
Right.
challenging the status quo. Like, same thing with Lady Gaga, right? Like,
Literally
is
gonna say
now.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like a huge pop star, right? But it comes through the initial thing of being an exile or a weirdo or doing things different. And only then by showing up and doing that consistently are you able to kind of break into the what becomes mainstream sort of thing.
Right.
I also so funny that the Golden Globes were canceled the last time that we had it. It's like, of course, like the big celebrity event where everyone gathers and we're just going to award all of these famous people. Like the South Node goes through Leo, and we're like, actually, no, we're just not doing that one this time
Done for you. Yeah,
around.
exactly. And I think like part of the reason I mean, I think one of the most impressive things about Lady Gaga is not just her initial popularity, but that she's able to like sustain that while still like maturing as a
Totally.
person. And like she's stood the test of time of the fame monster, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think part of the reason that she was able to do that is she was always like held to her principles. I mean, she was always like, I am for the LGBTQ community. Like, I do this for you. Like, even to the point where someone like accused her of like being trans or like,
Yeah.
being, she's like, so what? Like, I don't care. Like,
Yeah.
and that was so, and I think I like always held to her principles and not like compromised and
Hmm.
for the sake of fame or like fitting an image. And that is kind of the Aquarius way, is like, I'm going to like
Totally.
follow what feels right to me, even if that isolates me. And that's how trends are started.
Yeah, yeah. I think in a lot of ways, like Aquarians are trailblazers. I just looked and she has a lot of fortune in Aquarius. Um, but yeah, Aquarius, you're usually like they're ahead of the curve a little bit, a lot of the time. And I think that that's what
Definitely.
we see. Like the North Node goes in there, and all of a sudden, those trailblazers and those people who are thinking differently, we get more of that because their placements are getting lit up, right? They're getting
Right.
activated by the North Node, and all of a sudden, those ideas become bigger, magnified, right? And Pluto's influence in Aquarius right now is only serving
Mm,
to add something to that, right? Like I wouldn't be surprised if we
definitely.
really see like, prominent Aquarius people becoming bigger. And you can already see that taking shape with Zorn and Domini, like who wasn't watching that mayoral, election? It's like normally we're not super invested in like the mayoral elections. Like I don't even live in the US, and I woke up, the first thing I did that day was like I checked.
Right.
So invested. And I think that we're going to see kind of more and more of that with different Aquarian figures, throughout the length of this transit, which will be interesting to see. But I also wanted to go a little bit further back rather than just the last time. So I started looking, in like 1989, 1990, which was the previous time that this happened. And there was also one in
Hmm.
53. And like so unfortunately for me, because I hate the Aquarius and aliens like stereotypes, like, all of the pop culture astrology is like Aquariuses are like love aliens. And I'm just like, can we get anything else? Can I get the meme that doesn't tell me that I want to be on a spaceship? Like, please. Like I like Earth. Actually, I love space, but like don't really want to go there. And but then when I was looking into this, there was like so much space travel and new discoveries that happened the last time that the North Node was in Aquarius. Like we discovered like three more moons around Neptune and like rings around Neptune. There was a space shuttle that landed in like 1989. There was the Venus probe, Magellan, that launched from the space shuttle. It was the launch of the Hubble Space Telescope. There were so many things about space exploration. And then in 53, there was also some stuff that went down about like UFOs, where they literally had this thing called the Robertson panel, which was like all of these scientists got together to basically discuss the validity of UFOs and like whether or not they formed like a threat to society and to like the military. And they basically were like, okay, well, most of these like UFO sightings are totally explainable, but like maybe like 10% of them aren't, but like it's fine though. And so they kind of like confirmed it, but they were also just like, oh, it's probably nothing. Like it's probably fine. We don't really know what it is. And so, I think as we've been seeing more and more of this with Pluto and Aquarius, and I'm not like the aliens are coming person, but like, maybe with the North Node and Aquarius, the aliens might actually be
Right.
coming.
Well, I also just clocked that both of these dates also coincides to when the Saturn Neptune conjunctions happened.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. Like a completely different reality, right? Like this whole other species. Yeah, that is something. That's
And it's
interesting.
right, it's interesting that it's like we have that Saturn ruling the North Node, but it's with Neptune, and so it's like we're getting like there's structures happening, but they're shifting and they're maybe not fully formed, or there's like an unknown, and you have to
We're
kind
not
of be
seeing them
okay with that.
clearly. Hmm.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, definitely. And even just thinking about the fact that we tend to think of aliens as being a bit more like fantasy, right? But it's like, what about when the fantasy becomes reality and then it's not maybe so fantastical anymore? But it's just like a
Yeah.
real thing that you have to deal with right in front of you, So it will be really interesting to kind of see how that plays out on a greater collective level. But I think just interpersonally and, within your own chart, really just think about where these, nodes are going to be shifting signs because, like we're saying, it ties into so many of these other stories that we're going to be seeing, like Jupiter in Leo, right? And this North Node being ruled by Saturn in Aries. Is not like a Saturn in domicile, right? So there is still this kind of thing of like having to do it scrappy, and that's pulling into what we're hungry for in Aquarius is, there's that ravenous insatiability there. And at the same time, the planet that's ruling it isn't super resourced to be able to give everything there, but that doesn't mean we're not still going for it full tilt,
Yeah.
which feels kind of like an interesting parallel with the Jupiter South Node thing, you know?
Right. It's like, if anything, right. So as much as like the Saturn and Aries stuff is difficult, it's like we're not gonna, like, the point is to not stop or give up. or,
Hmm.
stop engaging with it. It's like kind of just fully going towards that. And then not being too caught up with that jovial of what am I getting out of this, right? What is the benefit? There has to just be like, I have to do the toil and trust that, especially because Jupiter and Leo will be trining Saturn and Aries. So
Yeah.
like there is like that supportive thing of like, if you do the work, like the benefits will just flow. But the more
Hmm.
you focus on the benefits instead of the work, like the more you'll suffer.
Yeah, it's like there's this interesting like more or less thing happening in both sides, right? It's like we have more Aquarius and less resources to go after those things, and then we have more support in Leo with Jupiter and less energy to go after that stuff. So there's
Yeah,
kind of like
yeah.
this really interesting dynamic between the two of them that I think is probably going to just feel contradictory a lot of the times and weird for us in our, experience of these transits. But I'm kind of excited for them, as someone who has like a lot of placements on the Aquarius Leo axis, like I didn't think I'd be saying that, but I am kind of like, in the same way that I was before my Saturn return started, I'm like, bring it on. Like, let's do this,
Like literally, bring it
let's go.
on.
It's time.
Well,
Which
also
brings,
like
yeah,
I was going to say your Saturn return will be done. So
I know. And I was gonna say, which brings me to Uranus and Gemini. Another big
yeah.
change coming for moi.
Oh, just the Civil War transit. It's fine.
Ooh, yeah. For anyone who doesn't know, every time Uranus has been in Gemini, the US has been involved in a major war and usually on US soil to some degree. So, not super fun, not super excited for that one. But, there's some good stuff I think that's associated with Uranus and Gemini. It's going to re-enter Gemini on April 26th, which means we are done with the excavation and the change and the instability and chaos that Uranus is
Hey,
bringing to
Tauruses.
Taurus. Like if you are a Taurus placement, you're like, I'm just like ready for it to be over. Congratulations, it's about to be over. If you also have Gemini placements, I'm sorry, it continues in a new way. But it's gonna, yeah, re-enter Gemini for good. We got a little bit of a taster similarly to Neptune and Aries earlier this year in 2025, but on April 26th, we're in it for the long haul, really. And in past Uranus and Gemini transits, we've had a lot of innovation. Like I think that there is something really profound about the fact that Gemini has this ability to like want to dig into all of these different rabbit holes and explore and gain new ideas. And there's like that mercurial spirit. And I think Uranus is like, okay, let's shift, let's change, let's disrupt, and I think we see changes in air travel a lot of the time. We've seen like really interesting inventions come about, like I forget what they were, but there was some that were like in photo and photography. I think it was like, super glue, like rubber, stuff like that, right? Where it's like little things that have actually had like a really big impact, on our world, were also invented during this transit. So I think that there's definitely going to be some good stuff. I think there's going to be some not so good stuff. Like I don't know if we need more technological advancement right now. I kind of feel like maybe we
Again,
should slow it down a little bit. I don't think we're ready for all of the things that we've already kind of got going, but I don't think it's going to slow down. I think between Neptune and Saturn doing their thing, having the North Node and Pluto in Aquarius, and then having Uranus and Gemini, we're AI. Oh my God, I'm terrified, but it's happening. Like I said, we gotta just I don't know.
yeah,
I don't know what we
yeah.
gotta
We've
do, but it's happening.
we've basically allowed this Silicon Valley to shape the world in its image
Yeah.
and according to its profits. And I mean, I think, yeah, my only hope with that Uranus and Gemini is change or like maybe like collective action. And but I'm thinking too, it's like at the very least, like maybe it'll like moving from Taurus, it'll like shift some of the impacts away from like the material or physical. Because Uranus and Taurus
Mhm.
is like, oh, you don't need to eat this year, right? I can just, maybe the crops won't happen.
Yeah, no, there has been
Versus,
so many
yeah.
food disruptions.
And just like right issues with like contamination, and now it's like we can't trust food safety, and that's been great, but now it's like Uranus and Gemini is so much in the realm of like new ideas and technology, and how do we adapt. And it almost makes me feel like, because the thing about Uranus is like whatever he brings, it's going to be the opposite of what you predict. So I feel like it'll also bring in like, as we're saying, more people being more Luddite or reading books or sort of shying away from like being too technologically enmeshed, just because it's oppressive at this point and it's making us dumber. And so I'm hopefully it's like there will, there's someone I follow who like talks about trend forecasting, and he's mentioned it's like, yeah, as I said before, it's like influencing will be about like, yeah, what do you know? Like what can you do rather than like what do you have,
I
or
love
like
that.
how beautiful does your life? Like can you actually read a full book and understand it? Well, I think will be a flex, as more and more as we enter Uranus and
Please,
Gemini.
a literacy revolution would be great. It's needed. Yeah, that would be definitely an interesting one. And I think, in terms of the personal stuff, right, it's really going to be people with early degree Gemini placements that are going to feel this the most in
Yeah.
2026. Uranus is going to get up to 5 degrees before stationing retrograde. And so if you've got any mutable placements between say, like 0 to 7-ish degrees, 8 degrees, this is you. This is your time. This is your thing. And I feel like a lot of times with Uranus stuff, like, people like to talk about whether the outers are benefic or malefic. And I'm like, Uranus is malefic when you don't want change. Uranus is malefic if you are attached to a certain idea or narrative or behavior or pattern and don't want to let it go. Then it's going to feel like hell because you're going to go kicking and screaming, and Uranus is going to make you change anyway. So as much as you can, just kind of throw your hands up and say, like, I'm ready for whatever this throws at me, I think is kind of the best approach a lot of the times to take with Uranus and Gemini. Like I said, I say this as someone who's got a very early degree Gemini rising. So y'all are going to see whatever happens to me.
You
But I
think you
think
know
it's
me.
yeah, I mean, maybe I won't even know me after this. Maybe I'll know me in a new way. You know what I mean? But there is going to be a big change and a big transformation. And the thing about outer planet stuff is that it does take a while. It's like this is an 8-year transit, so it's not a one and done, right? It's a constant unfurling of different iterations of something that is bringing you to a different place. And so wherever this is taking place in your life, think about the house, right? Think about any planets that you have in Gemini, especially again 0 to 7 degrees, because that's really what's going to be up for review and is going to, it's going to feel a little chaotic.
Yeah, but it's like I think, at the end of, Taurus. So the Uranus and Taurus was in my 10th house, right? I think since like
Hmm.
2018. And
Yeah,
I
2018.
distinctly remember, that was like a few years since I started studying astrology. And I remember sitting down and looking at that and being like, oh, I think this is going to be me changing my careers and being an astrologer. And
Mm.
now I'm a full-time astrologer. So like, right, and was there plenty of work and chaos and unknown along the way? Of course. But like that's what needed to happen for me to like totally like change my like definition of like my career and my public
Hmm.
role. And right, because I continued to like sustain and like assent to those changes over like the past like 7 years, like I now have this new stability like from that change.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, for me, it was 2018. Uranus went into my 12th house of immigration. And that was when I kind of officially, I'd lived in France for a year, and then I kind of beep boop bopped around with my husband. And then it was when I kind of fully planted myself in France. It was like, okay, I'm going to be here indefinitely, basically. And I got like long-term visas. And now at the very tail end of this, I'm like, okay, time to apply for citizenship. So a big part of my Uranus and Taurus through the 12th journey has been really related to being in exile in a foreign land by choice, right? This is still a benefic sign. But at the same time, it's been hard and there's been a lot of isolation and, I don't have my family. Like I had to make new friends, and there's been a lot of that about being in a new land. But at the same time, like as you're saying, like I became a full-time astrologer and like this is my life now, right? It's like, okay, and I'm becoming a French citizenship and or French citizenship.
Yeah.
I'm becoming a French citizen, and that is my life now. And I think that that is about, the journey that we're about to go under with Uranus and Gemini, that it's going to probably feel a lot more rapid, a lot more starts and stops rather than a slow roll, right? Because yes, Uranus is going to go retrograde a few times, but Mercury is going to be changing signs all the time. Retrograde, direct, Cazimis, all that good stuff, right? Is the fastest moving planet besides, the moon. So there's going to be a lot of starts, stops, redos, reworkings of those greater changes throughout the length of this transit. So I think it's going to be kind of like a haha, you thought you knew? Guess what? You were wrong. It's actually this. And then it's going to be like, you thought that was it? Nope, nope, no, we're going to go over here and it's actually going to be this way, right? We're going to get a new version of this transit
Yeah.
really, really regularly, which it's going to be an interesting one to watch. But yeah, kind of be
Yeah.
prepared for that. The big moments are, I think, really around like May to July. We start getting a lot of planets hitting this Uranus, right? So moves in on April 26th, then May 17th, Mercury conjoins Uranus at 1 degree. And then May 22nd, just a couple days later, we get the Sun conjoining Uranus. And then the big one, mm, July 4th, Mars conjoins Uranus at 3 degrees of Gemini. And I'm kind of seeing this as a series, right? Where it's like Mercury comes in and creates an idea about what needs to shift, what needs to change, what needs to be innovated and disrupted. The Sun brings clarity and kind of like a vision about how to do it. And then Mars comes in and it's like, ooh, okay, we're making the change. It's going to be a very quick, rapid, unexpected severing. Probably unexpected revelations around where you want to put your energy, but it is also explosive, especially around ideas. It feels very like getting in fights around politics, and it's
Right.
very debate kind of oriented, but to me it spells out conflict and divisiveness more than most. Like I think that this one, and especially given the time of the year that this is happening in the States, is like I'm a little gird your loins, for that one.
Right. And I think with the Mercury and Sun conjunctions in May, we'll get some warnings. And
Yeah.
then the changes we don't deal with are going to come through like very jarringly and abruptly at July 4th. And I'll just say, I hate fireworks. I don't like them. They're loud, they're boring. Let's stop doing them. And don't do it this year, particularly if you want to keep your fingers. Like for the pets, let's stop. There's so
Yeah.
many other cooler ways to celebrate this country than fireworks.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's definitely a good time to like exercise caution, especially if you're doing like standard July 4th things. Like if you are barbecue, this is giving like unexpected burn while you're grilling
Yeah,
or,
fire. Yeah.
like, yeah, fire. It's not a good one, so be really
Not chill.
cautious around what you're saying, how you're saying it, your actions, right? Who you want to get into fights with. But I think in a large way, with those outer planet transits, they often need another planet to come in to like
Yeah.
push through their significations. And I think earlier this year, we got the inklings of some of those Uranus and Gemini, energies and where it was going to be hitting that part of our charts, right? Like Uranus got up to, I think, 2 degrees before stationing retrograde. And so I think there was like a little bit of this already kind of happening and an idea of what needed to shift. But then Mars coming in, I think, gives us the audacity to make the quote unquote crazy change, So whatever it is that hasn't shifted at that point, it's gonna. So if you guys didn't notice, Chloe froze a little bit there. Hilariously, her connection got cut as we're talking about Mars Uranus. So you invoke the planets and then they start doing things, guys. If you want to
Exactly. I gotta clean up my computer.
So if you want to know what's going to happen during that transit, unexpected, cuts in technology and our ability to communicate with other people, severings that
Ooh,
feel
yeah.
challenging in the moment. It's like, where
Back up
did
your
she
data,
go?
people.
Back of your
Invest in
data.
physical media because they're deleting that.
Exactly, exactly. No, it's so funny and on the nose that I can't even.
I know.
I can't even believe that just happened. Anything else on the Mars-Uranus conjunction, though, that you feel like we got to mention?
Um, no, it's just that it will be a not chill time for America, particularly.
Yeah.
It makes me think too, like one of my friends who predicted he thinks that there's gonna be a lot of like mini like skirmishes in Walmart parking lots that happen in Uranus and Gemini. Like there'll be like Civil War vibes. That'll be like these little like militias, like kind
Oh
of
my God.
that very Gemini way, kind of just happening in factions. So it's like if you're not directly there, it's like I guess we're in a civil war.
Oh dear. I really hope it's not. I hope it's not that. But yeah, for anyone with early degree mutable stuff too, this conjunction happens at 3 degrees. So
Yeah.
be really mindful around this time, like especially if this is your first house, if this is your sixth house, like health wise, right? Like those can
Mhm.
definitely bring up some unexpected injuries and things like that. So just moving with a little bit more awareness and caution. Mercury's also stationing retrograde at this time, right? So ruling this conjunction, which is literally saying that there's something that's trying to like speed up and cause unexpected things in a Mercury ruled sign as Mercury is moving at basically the slowest that they move, and averse. So can't even support what's going on in Gemini or see what's going on in that sign. So it's just going to be a little pokey, a little
Yeah.
inflammatory. And depending on where this is happening in your chart, I would just expect some probably sudden shifts that really cause you to change direction. And if you've got early degree mutable stuff, in a significant way. So,
Yes.
I'm personally really not looking forward to this one. I hope it doesn't take me out. But if you guys don't hear from me after
Oh,
July 4th, 2026, you know what happened. It was the Mars-Uranus conjunction near my ascendant.
leave her alone.
Leave me alone. And then the only other thing to mention for Uranus and Gemini is that the station's retrograde at 5 degrees on September 10th. So there will be kind of a review and a revision of a lot of the different changes that Uranus has kind of gotten
Mhm.
started around that time. And again, anyone who has early degree mutable placements, you're going to feel that one because those retrograde stations for outer planet stuff tend to be pretty big, pretty significant moments in the overall story and the process of that unfolding. So buckle up, guys. We're all in it together.
Right. And then it'll be something like 5 months of retrograde. So you'll have plenty of time to review and make
Yeah,
changes to your changes.
exactly. All right. Well, I know that one of the last things that we really wanted to make sure that we talked
Mhm.
about was the Venus retrograde, which is
Yeah.
happening in the later portion of the year. She's stationing retrograde at I think like 8 degrees of, right? Is that right? 8 degrees of
On
Scorpio.
October 3rd. Yeah.
Yeah. And then is going to station direct at 22 degrees of Libra. Chloe, give me your elevator pitch for this Venus
Yeah.
retrograde.
Well, so this one has I don't know if the right word is special place in my heart, but that's what I'm going with because this was the first like Venus retrograde that I was cognizant of since studying astrology.
hmm
And
You
I
mean the
really
last one, the last Venus
yes,
retrograde? Yeah,
yes, or the first, the earliest.
yeah, yeah.
And I really remember reading an article where Austin brought up the like Venus Cloacina or Cloacina archetype, which is Venus of the sewers vibe, where it's like, wait,
Mm.
first off, we're getting like Venus at her detriment. Venus like digging into the dirt, going into the scary places, feeling like, intense passions and having to like review that
Yeah,
and maybe look at how we're maybe being like too harsh or too martial, and then it's she makes such a big dignity shift back into Libra, also opposing Saturn the whole time.
yeah,
And then it's going to be like, okay, how do we then like, but especially in the third decan of Libra, like how do we then relate in a way that like fits into our life or allows us to be like many different things at once? And so, right, any Venus retrograde, I mean, typically, people talk about like it having to do with relationships, but it's really a time of like, are the pleasures, are the connections in my life like actually in alignment? And with the Scorpio, like when something doesn't work for you, like it's gonna hurt. Right.
hmm
And then the Libra comes in, we're going to be able to like step back and have that very Aries perspective and like, okay, does this fit into the rest of my life? Or, how do I, balance all of the different obligations? And does that balancing feel good? Right. I mean,
yeah,
it's always a time of renewing our vows, like to our pleasures.
yes. And I do like that we start in Scorpio and end in Libra because it feels like although it starts out rocky, it ends in a really supportive place in terms of essential dignity.
Mhm.
I think of Venus retrogrades as a huge reevaluation of our desires. Like it's a big question of what do you want? What do you like? What are you attracted to? And realizing that there's probably been some shifts in those things recently that maybe you haven't necessarily acknowledged or you haven't communicated to other people about or that you haven't really let take precedence in a way where it's like you're still kind of
Yeah.
like, I pretend I don't see it. And then Venus goes retrograde and you go through the whole process and it's like, oh my God, I cannot ignore that there's this desire bubbling up in me that I didn't know I had before. And now I have no choice but to acknowledge it. And I will say that at least she stations retrograde in her own bound of Scorpio. So there's like a little bit of support for her as she begins her journey into the underworld. But, there is this kind of stripping bare of all of the Venusian qualities, right? So when Venus goes retrograde, we don't see her in the sky. It can feel like we're losing her, like we're a little bit less connected to those Venusian principles. And while that's true in some respects, I also feel like it's because we're reorienting around them. It's like the absence of our prior desires as we make space for and begin to understand and uncover the new desires and really allow them to take over. So yeah, that's kind of the way that I've been thinking about this one. It's like whatever part of the chart Scorpio and Libra occupy for you, those are both part of the desires that are changing. And in particular, the way that those two things work together. So it's a complete and cohesive story, right? It's not just like, oh, there's a Venus retrograde in Scorpio, and like what I want in that area of life is changing. And then also what I want in the fifth house is changing. It's like, no, something's happening in Scorpio that changes your desires in Libra and vice versa. So those two things are really going to meld and entwine in unique and surprising ways.
Yeah, yeah, and was there something I was going to say? I was, I'm just thinking too of like, right, the main sort of like relationship thing that happened last time that, we had this, Venus cycle was when Ariana Grande and Pete Davidson got together, which was like this thing, yeah, of like, right, these, basically he's famous now because of, this famous
Hmm.
because of Ariana, and but that was
And he's a
also like
Scorpio.
yes, so
Scorpio
Scorpio, and like the whole thing
Stallion.
about BDE came out, for during that time of like being basically like, stigmatized by this guy. But then that Venus and Scorpio thing of like they broke up because like her ex Mac Miller died of an overdose that summer,
Hmm.
and she was like, oh, there's actually a desire in me to heal from that. Like that's
Yeah.
not fully dealt with, and thus I can't go forward with this relationship, even though it's like in that like very Venusian way. It feels so good. And like, they had crushes on each other, but it's like that long term. Yeah. Like she needed to explore the depths and like, and I think if you're worried about like relationships ending at this time, it's like, I mean, you have experienced many Venus retrogrades with your husband and not, right? It
Yeah.
has to do with like, does this person align or allow this desire or are they like
Yeah.
actually counter to that? So yeah, I'd love
Yeah.
to give
Yeah.
any reassurance to the people worried.
Yeah, I mean, also like for further reassurance, something I was horrified to learn was like I looked up our first like conversation, it was like the true
Of
beginning
course.
of our
Yeah,
relationship,
yeah, yeah.
and it's Venus was like retrograde in Aries. So we actually started talking during a retrograde, and yeah, guys, here we are, like 8, 9-ish almost
Our
years
love,
later,
baby.
and we're doing great. And I will say that Venus retrogrades are significant times in our relationships. Like the last Venus retrograde in Leo was like a big part of us deciding to have a kid, and that was a huge change from everything that we had discussed prior. But there was like a new desire that was kind of coming through, especially for me, and like there was a lot of like a reorientation around our relationship because of that. And it doesn't mean it was all like super easy and soft and comfortable because that's not usually how Venus retrogrades go. They kind of strip you bare as you hold space and like, make known this new desire, but it also can bring you a lot closer, because you are being honest, right? You are allowing this to emerge. You're allowing the thing to change. And yeah, think about all of the relationships that have lasted many, many years or a lifetime, right? It's like those people have gone through Venus retrograde, Saturn returns, all of the things together. It's like, yeah, it can be a relationship tester, for sure, but it doesn't mean it's a relationship ender. It's a
Exactly.
reevaluation of where you're at in the relationship. And one of the best things you can do is have open and honest communication because when Venus does
Yeah.
station retrograde, she is also stationing in a conjunction with Mercury. And this is happening in Scorpio, where we tend to be a little bit more private, a little bit more guarded, and a little bit more secretive about how we're feeling and our sensitivities and the ways in which we either do or do not trust other people. And I feel like this is like a call to say we got to talk about the hard stuff. We got to talk about the ugly stuff. We got to talk about what's not working so we can get it to a place where it does. And we get the Venus Cazimi at 0 degrees of Scorpio, which is so utterly fascinating to me. I know I keep saying that, but I'm just like, you can tell. I live in awe of the cosmos, right? It's on October 24th. We get the Kazimi at 0 degrees of Scorpio, and it's like, okay, that flash of clarity and insight, and then Venus gains dignity. And it's like there's something about that moment that also triggers us feeling a lot more resourced and a lot more supported, even if Venus is doing the retrograde thing. There's also going to be a sign boundary, between her and the sun after that point. So even if she's combust, there's a little bit of protection. She's in chariot in
Mhm.
Libra, right? Because she's in her own sign. So she's not harmed by the combustion either. So it's like there's this, I feel like Venus and Scorpio retrograde is like the cracking open of all of the ugliness and the hardness and all of the stuff that you don't want to share, all of your shit, and talking about it and having really hard discussions and then having the breakthrough moment around October 24th when Venus goes Cazimi and then kind of repairing in Libra and like bringing some harmony into that area of life and thinking about the ways that what goes on in Libra can support what happens in Scorpio, right? And then you're going to bring that knowledge and wisdom of what Venus regained in Libra back into Scorpio when she goes back through that sign after she's stationed direct.
Yeah, it's very much like eating your vegetables before the dessert kind of vibes. Like, right. And I think that the main thing that'll like, if you're willing to do the work for Venus stuff, which is not Venus's favorite thing, which is I think why these retrogrades are so challenging, especially with Scorpio. It's like you have to find like connection amidst what is maybe ugly on the surface or
Hmm.
difficult or just triggering. And then once you kind of do, get your hands in the dirt, it's like you're blessed with that more Libran, like, yeah, ability to kind of like hold it all in balance and like more easily flow between like what do I need and what does this relationship need? Oh, but what does this part of my life need? And what does this community need? And not,
Yeah.
and not and find a point of stillness like amidst change, like allowing us to be more flexible and more of ourselves when relating.
Yeah, and I think that's the point, right? Is like relating should feel like you get to take up space and you also make space for other people as well to be who they are, to like what they like, to want what they want, and to accept them in that. And it feels like that acceptance piece is a lot harder when Venus is in Scorpio. And then we get Venus in Libra, and she becomes a lot more concerned with the we, right? She stops feeling like she's on this battlefield fighting and like she has to be, mistrustful of everyone who comes her way. And all of a sudden she gets into Libra and she's more open, she's more receptive, she's more social. And even if she's still doing her retrograde stuff, like she gets through it, and she's better off for it at the end of the day. So I definitely feel like there's some good stuff that comes out of this. It's just, yeah, I love the what you said about like her having her vegetables, and then getting dessert afterwards. It feels very much like that. Like we definitely do the hard part
Yeah.
first. She does
Yeah.
station on the fixed star Spica. Tell us about that. I feel like we get so many interesting like
Yeah.
stations on really key
Right?
fixed stars this year. So it's the year of the
Mhm.
fixed stars. Tell us about this one.
Yeah, so I really see Spica as she's a very creative star. She's so useful with what I see as like the incubation process of
Hmm.
creating, of like getting in tune with like yourself and your body and your tastes, like away from like outside influences. Like her Arabic name translates to like the uplifted, unarmed one, where it's like she's not in the midst of battle. Like, I always tell like Spica people, like you're here to cultivate like a certain mastery or genius, basically, in like whatever talent you desire, but that
Hmm.
requires like giving your like projects like time and like space to become like exactly themselves. Like one of my
Mm.
favorite Spica figures is Frank Ocean, who has this as his
Okay.
heliacal rising star. And it's like, we don't decide when Frank Ocean releases an album, but when he does, it like changes all of music.
Yeah.
And like, so
Blonde was a
seeing
cultural
yourself,
reset.
yeah, and like and there's definitely a thing of like, right, Spike is part of the Virgo constellation. She's seen as like a virgin, and so she's not necessarily like the relationship star. Like we've actually like had a friend who's like, Spike is like, don't have a family because it's like getting in the way of your work. But I think it's
Yeah.
just more about balancing like what in my life needs my solo attention and incubation, and
Yeah.
how can and how do my relationships help contribute to that, or where is there like a leakiness that I need to like balance that, where do I need to sometimes, and especially like Libra is so much about calm and harmony, and Spike is also like, looking for that. So I think it just also might mean like sometimes like the only thing you can do is sort of like retreat or get away from like the
Yeah.
noise of other people and like come back to yourself and be like, what is actually important to me, like what am I here to do, and then how do I like have my life like fit into that, or like,
I
yeah.
love that. Yeah, yeah, that's great. And I think it's just, again, always important to remember to take this in the context of your own chart and consider where this is happening for you because it's going to show up so differently for different people. Like if this was maybe you have Scorpio in the 10th, right, and Libra in the ninth, for example, then it might be a realization when Venus stations retrograde that like, oh, I'm doing something that doesn't actually feel super good for me professionally and publicly, and
Right,
maybe I don't want to be involved in this anymore. And then Venus goes back into the ninth, and it's this reevaluation of your devotion and your beliefs and your desires, and this desire to do work professionally that is
right.
more in line with your religious, spiritual, political, philosophical, ideological beliefs. And then as she moves forward, starting to consider, okay, like you said with Spica, right? Like, I want to do this work. I want to give myself over to this. And also, it has to become something as well, right? On its own, and seeing what the thing wants to become, and then moving forward and starting to implement some of those changes when Venus goes back into Scorpio. So that's kind of one way you can think about those, two houses interplaying with each other. It's like the stories are connected, and Venus will
Yeah.
go back into Scorpio on December 4th, right? And she'll pass the stationing degree around December 16th and December 17th. And that's when we're really going to start moving on from this storyline. But that's a while, right? She stations retrograde at October 3rd and then doesn't pass that stationing degree until December 16th. So the end of our year is going to be very bookmarked by this change of desires. And very shortly after that, it happens in technically 2027, but Mars will go retrograde in Virgo. And so stationing at this time as well, which is like, okay, we just did this big reevaluation of our desires and our relationships and what we want. And now we're going to do a big reevaluation of our actions and where we're putting our energy. And again, as we've talked about so much throughout this forecast, is like these things don't happen in isolation. They are contributing to each other. It's almost like, Venus hands off the retrograde baton to Mars, who stations, I think I want to get the exact date, but it's like right at the beginning of January, I think. Yeah, January 10th, January 11th, right? So it's like she stations, and then, there's a little bit of this reworking. It's right after she moves into Sagittarius. She'll be at 3 degrees of Sag when Mars stations in early January. So it's like, she just wrapped up her whole journey through Scorpio, which is really going to be us implementing the lessons and the different things that we learned and uncovered during that retrograde and then Mars stations in early January. And it's like, okay, now we're more aware of what we want. We got to change some things to be able to put that stuff into practice and potentially change them in a different area of our life to make space for some of those new revelations to really take root in Libra and Scorpio.
Right. And, this is, for 2027, but Mars will then conjoin Jupiter in Leo
Hmm.
again, right? Sort of
Yeah.
renewing it. Like, how do your actions align with your values? And how does like the kind of more like, intimate shifts of like the nocturnal signs, Venus and Mars, like how does that then fit into like the larger plan for your life?
Yeah, that's a great point. I know we kind of got into 2027 a little bit there, but there's just so many things that feel like they're leading, as they always do, right into that. But I feel like we covered pretty much everything that we
Yeah.
wanted to. There was a lot to get through, but I feel like we talked about most of it. The only other thing that I'll just mention as an aside is that we're doing Mercury retrogrades in water signs this year. So, there's going to be a lot of rethinking and reworking our approach to those specific areas of life. And the fact that we also have the Venus retrograde happening in Scorpio, right, is like the way that we're feeling about stuff, we're going to start
Yeah.
thinking about how we're feeling a lot more and taking some changes or making some changes around those things and seeing some
True.
big internal shifts that then cause external changes in our reality as well. So that was the only other kind of thing that I wanted to mention. What about you? Do you feel like we hit it
Yeah,
all?
I think what came to mind is like this year is like a new chapter of a new book, right? But
Yeah.
it's like right, so what we're setting the scene, we're figuring out what needs to shift, what the new terrain and like characters are. But yeah, as you said, it's like this will just continue to unfold over like the many years as like all of the outers are then, getting used to their new signs. And,
Yeah.
Saturn continues like to move through Aries. So it's like right? We're just getting set up in like our new lives, so to speak. But like, as
Hmm.
you keep saying, it's like this is not all will be revealed. It's like we're just beginning to walk like a new, hopefully more aligned path.
Yeah, and it's going to take some time for us to integrate some of these changes, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's not overnight stuff. Like as you can see, a lot of this stuff is built out throughout the year, and there's certainly moments of influx of activity. But the fact that we get the Venus retrograde at the end of the year, we get the Mars, Uranus stuff in the middle of the year, we get the Saturn stuff and the Mars stuff at the beginning of the year, right? There's a there's some big stuff all throughout, so being open to the changes that present themselves and allowing and not try to force, I think, in different areas of your life is going to be a really great way to approach this year because there is so much that's changing. And, like I said in the very beginning, I think like astrologers tend to say that a lot, but this year really is the year of change. And I think the year of no return in a lot of ways. And ideally, it's all for a more aligned and authentic, version of our lives that we can step into and feel good about. But it might be a little bit of friction on the way to the feeling good.
Sure. But you're worth it. You're worth
You are worth
it.
it. All right. Well, we hope you guys enjoyed this 2026 forecast. If you did, please be sure to let us know. Make sure to like the video if you're watching on YouTube. Leave a review on your podcast platform of your choice. Make sure you are following both Chloe and I on socials at Desired Constellations for Chloe on Instagram, Psychic Nona on Blue Sky and Twitter. And for me, you can find me, Kira Ryberg, pretty much everywhere. And since this is kind of, the big end of the year episode, I do want to say that just a big thank you to everybody who listened this year. Got some really cool feedback about the way that the podcast has been going and has been received. And it's been really special to see that. And if you guys want to help keep the show going for another year while Saturn moves through my 11th house and my patience will probably be tested with the work that I'm putting out into the world, feel free to go ahead and sign up for my Patreon page. That is the best way to support the show and to ensure that it's around for years to come. Podcasts cost money and they don't make them. So if you want to help me out with that, that would be super, super appreciated. And as always, Chloe, thank you so much for being here. I could not have done this without you. Your presence, your wisdom is a blessing and a gift. And I hope
You as
everybody
well.
goes and supports Chloe's work as well. I don't pay her for being here, so you guys go pay her.
Yeah, and then maybe eventually we can both get paid for this.
A dream.
Ooh, what did she say? But yeah, obviously, guys, really, this wouldn't have happened without the beautiful effort and wisdom of Kira. So, like, isn't she amazing?
Thanks, girl.
Shout it out, wherever you are.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. We deeply appreciate it, and we'll catch you in the next one. Bye.
Bye.